start the meeting. Thank you. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the 2023-2024 Board of Aldermen Budget Deliberations. Today is Tuesday, April 25th, 2023, and we are continuing the department presentation portion of the 2023-2024 automatic budget process. This evening, we will be hearing from the Board of Education. Will everyone please stand up and join me as we salute our flag? Madam Secretary, will you please take the roll?
Alderman Archiola.
Present.
Alderman Beatty.
Alderman Beatty is going to be a little bit late, Madam Secretary.
Thank you. Alderman Broster. Alderman Casey.
Here.
Alderman Gurman.
Present.
Alderman Genentasio.
Here.
Alderman Harlow. Here. Alderman Marlowe.
Here.
Alderman Moffett.
Here.
Alderman Mulrennan.
Here.
Alderman Pacelli.
Here.
Alderman Parente.
Here.
Alderman Vitro. Here. Alderman Vitale. Here. Alderman Willis.
Here.
13 are present.
13 present. Thank you, Madam Secretary. We do have a quorum. Is there a motion to come out of recess?
So moved.
Motion is made and seconded to come out of recess. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? We're out of recess. Does the Board of Education have a presentation for us? I'm sure they do. You can begin anytime, Doctor.
All right. Can you hear me from where I am? Can you hear that? Yes? Okay, great. So good evening, everyone. Thank you for the opportunity to meet with you this evening. I'm Sue Glennon, Chair of the Board of Ed. We find ourselves sitting before you tonight during somewhat extraordinary and unprecedented circumstances. Just for a little background, as an agent of the state, the elected Board of Education is statutorily empowered with the responsibility to oversee the running of our schools. We have an obligation spelled out in state law to maintain our schools and implement educational opportunities that, in our best judgment, will best serve the interests of the state and the school district and meet the needs of our students, including but not limited to an appropriate learning environment which includes adequate instructional books, supplies, materials, equipment, staffing, facilities, and technology, equitable allocation of resources among our schools, proper maintenance of facilities, and a safe school setting. That is our charge, and we largely carry this out through our budget. So as I say to you every year, the budget before you represents the needs of our district, no more, no less, and reflects our commitment to honor and support our incredible staff and students, collectively numbering close to 6,500 humans. My fellow board members and I take this charge very seriously, including our responsibility to present a reasonable budget request, and this year is no different. We evaluate the needs based on discussions we have all year long, we prioritize based on assumptions we know are likely to occur, and we look for efficiencies. We thought we clearly spelled out the circumstances that explained and justified our budgetary needs this year: inflationary times, contractual costs, obligations and wage increases, and mandates, which made the disconnect we felt by the Board of Finance vote and the inaccurate information that seems to have contributed to that vote very frustrating. Together as elected volunteers, board members spend hundreds of hours every year working with our highly qualified superintendent and staff members to provide our young people with what, in our best judgment, is necessary to meet their needs. So let's take a quick walk down memory lane, and I'll spare you the sordid details. In 2010, Simon Lake School closed and the district moved to a K-2-3-5 sister school model. In 2014, we implemented a long-range plan that resulted in elementary redistricting and the return to a K-5 structure in 2015. These two steps caused fluctuations in classroom staff. Since then, with your support through the budget process, we've continued on a path of providing relevant experiences for our young people that align with current standards and needs and the desires of our community. We are 1 year away from being a district with a PK-12 world language program. For 3 straight years, we have been nationally recognized as a best community for music education. We have very popular STEM labs and teachers in our elementary schools and have students who excel in science Olympiads. We continue to offer challenging, high-quality high school programming that emphasize career pathways so that graduates can be college or career ready when they leave us, and I could go on. Throughout all of this, we've actually had an overall reduction in the number of teachers and regular staff members. Fewer, not more. And Dr. Kutaya will share some additional facts in a bit. The lingering effects of the pandemic continue to be evident in schools across the country, and Milford is not immune to the challenges. However, our efforts towards addressing social and emotional wellness and a coherent model of high-quality instruction for teaching and learning, again with your past support, have put us in a good place to address those challenges. I'd also like to point out that collectively, as Milford leaders, we've created a community that is attracting young, educated professionals. Who do you think can afford the $2,200 to $2,900 monthly rents for 1 bedroom in the upscale luxury apartment buildings apartments being built around town? Do we not want these folks to choose to stay in Milford when they start their families? It's the schools that will keep them here. And it's short-sighted to create an environment designed to attract this demographic and then not expect to support the types of schools they desire. A system that is forward-thinking and seeks to prepare young people for a world that is vastly different than it was even 10 or 20 years ago. Anecdotally, I know families are moving to Milford or considering a move. I hear from them in my business. I see posts all the time on social media asking about our schools, and the responses are almost always positive. Families proudly share what they love about Milford Public Schools, and we've heard loudly that residents value investment in our progress. They do not want to see us moving backwards, and this reduction leaves us with no good choices. It's either close a school or jeopardize the progress we've made by cutting programs that you've supported in past budgets. This is Dr. Kutaya's 5th budget cycle, and year over year, our budgets have become more efficient. I would have hoped you would recognize that. Just to give you an analogy, if you were to cut $1.8 million from your paving budget, you wouldn't pave roads next year, but you wouldn't have to go and rip up what you've already done. It doesn't work like that with this budget. There's no cutting around the edges. A $1.8 million reduction is extensive, and it will impact what's already in place. So I'll go on record right now and say that I do not believe we should be closing schools. I think my board agrees with me, and to be honest, it's also the message we've gotten from the city. I believe we should be rethinking how we use our schools to best meet the needs of our young people in a 21st century era and beyond, and that includes special ed. But if forced into it because of a $1.8 million reduction to what we need to maintain what we currently have in place, we would choose closing a school over throwing away the millions of dollars in investments that we've made, again with your support, to implement transformative programs for the benefit of our young people. And let me be clear, this goes way back to Dr. Fieser's tenure. The progress has been years in the making. Dr. Kutaya's vision moved it along, but the years of foundational work and financial investment predate her time here in Milford. This budget maintains the progress we've made, nothing more. There's no new programs in it. And by all accounts, this progress has been supported by you and by the Board of Finance with your general support of the funding that we've previously requested, and even by the mayor, who until now, I've heard say, we don't want schools that are just good enough. We want great schools, we want excellent schools, which makes this turn of events all the more bewildering and, in my opinion, somewhat shameful. The Board of Education didn't create this situation. This board didn't create this situation. But we are left to deal with it. But only you have the power to make it right. So now we'll get into some details. Dr. Kutaya will share, and then we'll answer all of your questions so that I hope that you'll leave tonight with the facts. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. It's good to see you again. For the, I think is the 5th time, Ms. Glennon. Thank you. I always enjoy speaking to you as a board. I find you incredibly engaging. Your questions in the past rounds of budget processes have left me thinking about our practice, have challenged me, and I look forward to the very same this evening. I always consider this more of a dialogue than a presentation, so I'm grateful for whenever I could talk with you about the great things happening in Milford Public Schools and our plans for the future and how a budget supports that. So this evening, while I know this is about a budget presentation, it really is much greater than that. It's about our story. And because this is an extraordinary budget season for us, my presentation is a little longer than usual. I'm sorry, not sorry. My presentation also breaks many PowerPoint rules, has way too many words on some of the slides. But I think it's really important that you hear directly from me about some of the things you've been hearing about our school district. I also want to address later in our presentation some of the things that have been discussed and have not been completely accurate. So to break down the presentation, our evening story has 6 chapters. This evening, I'm going to give you a little bit of background or go through the documents that we use to develop a budget. We're going to talk about the numbers. We're going to talk about how I lead developing a budget. We're going to talk about some misunderstandings, move into a little glimpse of what does the future look like for young people and what we want to offer to young people in our schools in the next 10 years. Because for me, this is not just a one-year budget. My next 2, 3, 4, 5 years are already being built. And the success of this budget rolls over into the success of the next few years and our planning. And Mr. Marlowe, I haven't forgotten my promise to you last year. We're going to talk about how do we know how we're doing, okay? I wrote myself that note, by the way. I wouldn't forget. So, repeatedly, I talk about 3 core documents that guide our work. And I don't want to assume that you know what they are, but foundationally, we are guided by the relationships framework. It is the foundation on how we do business in our schools. It talks about how we treat each other, how we express care, how we expand possibilities. It talks about how humans interact with humans, and that's foundational to what we teach young people. Secondly, we have a defined model for high-quality instruction. So what does that really mean in layman terms? We have 491 learning spaces in our schools, 491 classrooms. We have a defined model of what we think high-quality instruction looks like in every classroom, whether the child is 5 or 15. Priorities that are reviewed annually and adopted annually by the Board of Education. guides our work on building a budget. They tell us as administrators, this is what's important to us this year. That demonstrates a working tandemly with our elected officials. The budget assumptions is what we build. In October of each budget year, we give our very best guess of what we think the economic world is going to look like in the 23-24 school year. Some of the things that we pointed to moving forward, we knew that we were going to have to deal with post-COVID learning. We knew we were going to have to deal with increased needs in the area of mental health. Transportation costs are going up. Utility costs are going up. Special education costs are going up. These assumptions demonstrate for all of us that in an educational school system, we are not immune to what is happening in the economy. How much are you paying for a dozen eggs? Well, we don't buy, well, maybe Ms. Foster's buy eggs, but we don't buy eggs. But you can imagine what we buy have exponentially increased in cost as well. I want you to keep that in mind as we go through the line items of what areas are increasing and how we have been able to find efficiencies to limit the impact and the increase. So those are the principles that guide the development of the budget starting in October of every year. So let's get to the numbers part. I have chosen to present to you this evening what the Board of Education moved forward, which is a proposed budget of $106,488,950, which is a 4.392% increase over last year. Now, I know what is before you is a different number from the Board of Finance, and I'm sure we'll get into that in a little while. But my priority as the instructional leader of this school system is to share with you, the last body that can take any action on this budget, what our needs are. And then, of course, we'll get into, if it has to be reduced, what the impact will be. So there are 4 key drivers to the increase in the 4.392, sorry. That would be an increase in salaries and benefits. We are in the first year of a new teacher's contract. We are moving over some positions from our ESSER grant, primarily counselors and an equity supervisor. We have moved over, we also have an increase in non-certified staff, and we have some added costs in the area of benefits. We will break this down more so in the next slide. We have an increase in contracted services and tuition, particularly special education and transportation. We're looking at rising fuel costs, and we have a few new state mandates that are unfunded. So let's take a look at breaking down the 4.392%. If we take a look at the salary and benefits line of the 4.392, 3.43% is salaries and benefits. And these are salaries primarily due to a new contract and addition of some positions that are counselors. We've talked about counselors. I remember a conversation last year, and many of you asking and inquiring about the mental health status of our young people with great concern and care. We believe these counselors are critical to the mission of our work. 0.32% of this is related to special needs. 0.31% is related to transportation. 0.18% of the increase is some improvements to already existing programs, and 0.15% is related to state mandates. You will see the related dollar costs as well to the right of that chart. In overview, I'm going to give you some highlights of some of the improvements we'd like to move forward with. And one of the things that's hanging in the balance for me, if we are to sustain a reduction, is what do we do with elementary world language? I stood before you and many other officials jumping for joy to know that we could be adding a world language program to our elementary schools. being one of few in the state of Connecticut to be able to do that. And here we are needing to add an FTE to complete the pre-K-5 continuum and being faced with maybe not being able to do that. I will get into this more later in this presentation, but we are a human capital-driven business. We run on people. You know we run on Duncan? Well, we run on people. People is what delivers services and programs. So if we're going to increase programming, many times, more often than not, it will relate to increased staffing. So we could say, yes, go Milford Public Schools, add a world language program at the elementary, yay! But that means adding FTEs. And it feels, it's kind of tough to get hit over the head of, hey, your FTEs are going up and your enrollment's going down, and that doesn't make sense. Well, what makes sense is that when you add programming in schools, you add FTEs. And I'll show you a little bit about the trending of FTEs, by the way. We have a science-based short experience, which I'm going to talk about in a little bit. We've been piloting a new math program all year in the middle schools. We've engaged students and teachers to pilot two programs. We're using teacher and student voice to make a decision, and now we're about to say, sorry, we may not be able to do that. And the program is better aligned with standards, with revised curriculum. It's more rigorous, it's more challenging, it's more relevant. Again, these system improvements are $177,000 of a $4.4 million request. In the high school column, you'll see the addition of a CNA course, the addition of a Spanish conversation and culture course, and new AP physics and statistics books. A new CNA course. The demand is more than we can keep up with. There are more and more kids that are signing up for the CNA course. We want to be able to add sections. What does that mean for us? We have to add FTE. The first year I got to Milford, I met with students to get their input on how are things going, how can I as a new superintendent make it better for you. At both high schools, and they didn't talk to each other beforehand, they both said, we need a fifth-year option in Spanish. Can you make that happen? For those of us who are accelerated in this program, 5 years in, which goes to show that I didn't try to do everything in my first year, we're adding a Spanish conversation course. That means adding FTE. So of course our job is to look for efficiencies, and we did so in these three categories. We were able to roll back in utilities, other support and equipment in the tune of almost $150,000. This next chart is just another visual for you to consume, depending on how you consume data, to demonstrate that the bulk of the 4.392, the request is in salaries. And I'll tell you that $1.6 million of that 3.5 is the first year of a new contract. So that isn't even adding FTEs. That's honoring our teachers in a contract that we were able to negotiate with the bargaining unit to provide teachers increases over the next 3 years, which was vetted out through our Board of Education and using attorneys, of course. So of the 3.5 million, 1.6 million is the first year of a new contract. This is a visual representation that 71% of our budget is salaries. That's what it means to be a human capital-driven industry. This chart represents the breakdown by object code on where the increases are and where the decreases are. We invite questions line by line in our budget book. That is actually not something we've had the pleasure to do outside of with the Board of Education. So we welcome the conversation line by line this year. So let me tell you a little bit about me and how I budget, at least as a superintendent. Annually, I roll all of our accounts back to zero. That's called zero-based budgeting. To the great dismay and disappointment to our leaders, we build from zero up. And I require documentation and backup for every request, line by line. And that starts with department chairs, teacher leaders, coaches, anybody who is representing departments or grade levels, to principals, to supervisors, to our cabinet level, to me. And we go through line by line. I'm already sharpening my pencil. I'm already cutting around the edges. I'm doing my professional, ethical due diligence to provide you with a lean, mean budget. And some proof in the pudding is that since we've been doing that, we have less and less surplus at the end of each year. In fact, this year, we're going to make it by the skin of our teeth. If we were making it with a large surplus, then the accusations that there's fat in my budget and I'm not sharpening my pencil would be true. But there isn't. In fact, we're kind of worried how we're going to make it to the finish line. Not really, don't worry, we're good, okay? But we will make it to the finish line. But remarks like that are offensive to me because I lead with integrity. I develop a budget that is responsible and ethical, and that's what's before you tonight. In fact, so much so that we get down to developing, identifying priorities and strategy, and we're having all these big, great ideas, and guess how often I have to say no. In fact, Steve Jobs tells us that people think focus means saying yes to the things you've got to focus on, but instead, no, that's not what it means at all. It means saying no to the 100 other good ideas that there are, and you have to pick carefully. I assure you, I've said no. Let me give you some examples. I said no to more musical instruments. I said no to fan bikes. No to math high school furniture, no, and the list goes on here. In fact, had I not said no, we'd be looking at a 14% increase. And if I added all of our facility and maintenance needs, we'd be looking at 21.5%. Those are numbers where a pencil hasn't been sharpened. We were so good at budgeting that we even looked at ARP and ESSER to say, is there anything that would qualify under the state requirements under ARP and ESSER that we would move it over? Now, you know grants come with strings attached, right? You can't supplant. There are some requirements on post-COVID learning. We moved these items. We were able to use ARP and ESSER to fund some of these items. To me, that's another example of efficiency. So let's talk a little bit about the misunderstandings out there. I was really encouraged by the presentation last night that we did on parent involvement. We asked parents, how do you want to receive your information? Most parents want to receive it via email and text, and less than 1% of parents want to get their information from social media. Hallelujah. But unfortunately, I think that happens too much. And you may have heard some of these misunderstandings, so I am going to take advantage of my opportunity in front of you to clear it up. Misunderstanding number one, the school system is becoming very top-heavy. There's more administration. Not really. Actually, we've kept the same number for the last 10 years, and we have transparently added administrator in the area of equity, which it aligns with our Board of Education's commitment to ensuring equitable. 2.58% is the largest increase in the last 5 years. Well, that statement, the validity of that statement depends on what you're comparing. If you'll notice that the Board of Ed proposed budget over the last few years compared to what's been approved, actually, we've requested more. The Board of Education is now recommending a budget that increases spending by 100% more than any increase previously proposed. Actually, over the years, the Board of Ed proposed increases of 4, 5.65, 6 point, and even higher. And in 2021, the Board of Ed proposed a 3.109. Now, I am going to, while we're on this slide, call your attention to the years between like 12, 13, and 19, 20. Those are lower requests. And I'm going to explain to you in a little bit why. What my prediction is, my hunch is why that was lower. There's more counselors than teachers in the school system. No. Actually, for 7 years in a row, there were 14 counselors. In 21-22, we shared with the public and city officials that we were hiring additional counselors as part of ART. Special funding, and that gradually those counselors would move over to the general fund over the next 3 years. So in 22-23, we moved over 3 counselors. This year, we're proposing 4 counselors, and in 24-25, preview to next year's budget, there'll be 4 additional counselors. So, if you'll notice on this slide, the number of counselors have been consistent until the point where we announced we were going to add counselors. It was completely transparent. And to Ms. Glennon's point, if you'll notice, FTEs trended down. Lower budget requests, lower FTEs, lower enrollment. You see the connections there. We have been efficient and responsive to enrollment. Parents are pulling their kids out for private or homeschooling. And when I heard this one, it felt like the floodgates were open and kids and families were running for the hills. Actually, we have the data that says exactly the opposite. The new transfers out of Milford Public Schools since 2016-17 have significantly declined. New private school-only transfers out of MPS have significantly declined. New homeschooling have significantly declined. Total 8th graders leaving freshman year. This is a big one for me. There are fewer families choosing to leave our high schools and go to other private options. Now let me go on the record. I think private school and homeschooling, that's a family's choice. I respect it. I think there's students that is exactly the right place. But I'm addressing this tonight because of the sentiment that's been expressed that kids are leaving our schools and parents are homeschooling because they're so unhappy with how things are going. But if you look at this data, look at this. Only 48 freshmen decided to go elsewhere. I don't know, maybe I'm just gonna go on a limb. Maybe we're doing a really good job at foreign and law. And families are deciding to stay. Just a guess. Okay, let's look forward for a minute. Let's peek into the future. I have a crystal ball I used all through the pandemic. It served me well, so let's see how it serves us academically here. I will start with the story, though. I think it was like August or September, right before the school year started, I got an email from a nursing home in Southbury, Connecticut, and they said that they had a resident pass away, and that their family found 4 years of yearbooks in the residents' living quarters. And it was from the old Milford High School. And I have the Wepawag class of 1950 in my hand. And I started looking through it. I keep them in my office for now. We'll eventually move them over to the public library. And I thought it was somewhat serendipitous that it would fall in my lap in a year that we're looking at a potentially devastating reduction and maybe school closing. And this picture kind of made me giggle a little bit. You see the teacher there in the middle. She's like gonna stream the film on the reels. Some of us remember that, watching. Oh, you guys are too young, all right? You don't remember that? No, okay. Thank you for the giggles, Board of Aldermen. I appreciate that. Help me out here. But I'm looking at these pictures of the high schoolers, and albeit our furniture looks a little different, it caused me to ask, how different are our high schools today? And what are we preparing our young people for? How different are our schools today? Actually, I dug up some numbers. Over the last 2 decades, we're becoming much more diverse in our schools. I'll let you consume those numbers on the left. We've tripled in the percentage of young people who identify as not white. Our community has also become more needy. Over the last 2 decades, we've nearly doubled the number of young people and families who qualify for free and reduced lunch. If you know anything about free and reduced meals, your family has to hit a certain threshold of poverty. We have different kids in our schools today. It's not 1950. And we've been in this place where we continue to talk about declining enrollment, and I feel like it's been a distraction for us. So while the enrollment has declined, the FTEs have gone down, the percentages have been lower for a few years, this is my prediction of what we've been able to do with that. We've been able to turn FTEs into initiatives and new programming without having to ask the city for more money. That the school system has been incredibly efficient by increasing programming and asking for lower reductions. But this next slide I'm going to show you is my prediction that those days are gone, because we're flattening out. We're about plateauing in our enrollment. We're not looking at another couple of hundred, couple of thousand decline. We're going to be a school system of about 5,400 kids for the next 10 years. We will not have a declining enrollment and then a declining FTE, and I get to take those FTEs and I turn them into programming. If we're looking at new programming in Milford, we'll have to have a conversation on how will we afford that with everything else that's increasing. So, let's look at enrollment by school in 10 years. And I will officially go on record that I believe these are the perfect school sizes for Milford. If you start with the high schools, we have high schools at about 700. But let me also whisper into your ear, our kids' needs today are very different. You may have been part of a high school like I was. I was in a high school of 1,200 kids. That was okay for me in 1987. Our young people's needs are very different. The school community that is smaller and develops a sense of belonging is what our kids need today. These high school sizes are exactly what we need in Milford. Those middle school sizes are exactly what we need in Milford. We're actually playing with the numbers because we've been transparent about this of closing a middle school. Those numbers I'm incredibly uncomfortable with. What closing a middle school does to the size of a middle school, while we could fit the kids in the building, we can. We can get everybody in the 2 middle schools. But it impacts programming, impacts schedule, impacts how we support kids. I think 3 middle schools of 400 is perfect for us. And 8 elementary schools between 300 and 400 is a great sweet spot. I'm going to show you some numbers in special ed in a minute that hopefully will dispel for you finally that we have all this empty space in our schools. Because what we're doing with saving us money in special ed by keeping kids here and programming for them here is requiring more physical space and saving us money. So one of my favorite organizations to read and keep up with their research is the Institute for the Future. Been following them a long time. They do research and they put out 10-year trajectories usually. And they study what the trends are in the workforce, what the skills are going to be needed to enter that workforce, how families are changing, how the environment is changing. They just do a lot of future forecasting. They do that in the area of education too. So it's our priority in Milford Public Schools to ensure that our kids are on a career or college track that gets them ready for whatever they choose at the end of 12th grade. Whatever they want. When I was growing up, being a child of an immigrant family, the only thing that was an option to me is go to college. We came to America so you can go to college. Like that's the one, and the 4 options I had in 1987 was be a doctor, be a lawyer, be a teacher, be a nurse. Right? Does anybody remember that environment? And jobs didn't change very much. It was assumed that you were going to pick a career and stick to it, that you were going to be in education forever, right? My dad was a construction worker forever. Like he wasn't going to change fields or hop around from company to company. That's not the workforce today. There are jobs that we don't even know are going to be there when our kids graduate. In fact, one of the future jobs that were predicted kind of blows my mind a little bit, and I don't know how I personally feel about it. So this is not a value statement, this is just a fact. But one of the areas that are growing exponentially in the workforce is human-machine collaboration. And the Institute for the Future describes it as machines with a level of intelligence will be working side by side with people, with humans. And it's not going to be like a machine like I manipulate my personal device, because that's a one-way collaboration, right? What they are proposing in the future is that the machine, the robot, is actually going to have a sense of intelligence. And this is the hardest part for me to swallow, even emotions. And we are graduating kids. I know, you don't believe that, do you, Ray? Nope, nope. All right, that's mind-blowing, right? I saw that look. That's how I look. Like, really? No way. Yeah, right? So, sorry, Aldermen Vitale. I saw that look. So that's kind of mind-blowing to me that our kids we have to prepare them for that. And you should be asking me, the Board of Ed should be asking me, Dr. Kutaya, what are you doing to prepare for that world? Not what school was like when I went to school. I've heard that phrase so much in the last 2 months. When I went to school, I started in 1975 and graduated in 1987. I don't want that to be the standard for which I build for Milford Public Schools, right? That seems like a low standard. One of the jobs on this human-machine collaboration, there's a company already started called Lobe AI. And you are teaching the app to see and feel emotion. So there are human beings teaching machines how to see and feel emotion. There's already a company doing that today in 23. And there's another company called Playment, and that is a game-like platform where humans train machines and you get paid for it on an app. You could sign up with Playment right now and get paid to teach machines how to think and feel. I'm not sure, I'll be honest, that we have the right course selections and offerings at the high school for that. I think we're going to have to revisit our tech ed and STEM offerings. And that's the programming we want to be able to offer. This is just a visual that demonstrates career and college pathways that lead to post-secondary decision making. And it shows a continuum of preparing kids for low-skilled jobs to advanced skilled jobs. That is what we have to develop, is the continuum in our high schools. And I propose that we start that in 6th grade, not wait till 9th grade. That we have actually revamped our middle school schedule in preparation for this. I will say, if we close the middle school, we're unraveling that completely. So we want to start college and career exploratory options starting in 6th grade. What do we have? Out of the 16, these are 16 recognized career clusters in the nation. We have 3 started, and based on our work to date, we are trying to launch 5 more in the next 2 years. Right now, we have a career pathway at the high school in civic and global engagement, in computer science, and in entrepreneurship. Those are subcategories of some of those clusters. I will emphasize again and again that programming equals staffing for us. Where language, we had to add 8 FTEs for the elementary. We applauded the STEM labs at the elementary. That's an additional 8 FTEs. We want to add tech ed courses to the middle school. We'll have to hire more teachers. I said no to Mandarin at the middle school because of budget. We wanted to start to offer Mandarin as a world language in middle school. When I finally say yes, you'll likely see an FTE before you. We want to add the CNA class, and of course, right here in the right corner are the offerings we provide in AP. That has expanded over the years. And all along this is a slide that maybe is familiar to you. We have to keep an eye on our young people's mental health needs. That there is a crisis in our nation, and Milford is not immune to that. In a non-alarming way, our kids are not okay. We're seeing an uptick in lots of behaviors that we have not seen, and at younger ages and at expected ages. So while I'm not going to have us consume this tiered model, I need you to understand that there is research and science behind using school counselor, school psychologist, social worker. They all have very different roles, and in this tiered model, the bottom tier is where we support every kid, and that's what counselors do. They support every kid. It's a proactive measure. And as you move along the triangle, the more intense and more targeted the assistance is, and that's where your social workers and school psychologists come in. There's a role for everybody, and I have to tell you, our 3 support staff have never been busier in their schools. So I really don't know how to answer the question, why do you need school counselors? I feel like we shouldn't even have to answer that. But we're happy to provide with you with data if you need it. So this is a wow slide. We just recently crunched this number. So you know special ed costs, they rise every year. Our needs are becoming greater. The state average of students identified with special need has incrementally been growing across the state. They're at about 17% identification rate. We are lagging like right behind that. I think we're like at 16.7. I got a nod from Mr. Brown. So let me show you here in this chart how, one, we're doing the right thing by when we can, we keep kids in district. And two, we save money. Because sending kids out, you pay an individual tuition. And we do that for our most needy students for whom we cannot program. At the elementary level, we program for 95 students in 14 programs. The kinds of programs are there on the right. So folks, I'll translate that also into 14 classroom spaces. Now, I've already aged myself. When I went to school in the 70s, students with autism didn't go to school with me. Students with emotional needs, they didn't go to school with me. We don't do that any longer. In the public school system, we believe when we can keep students and as part of their school community, part of the family here, and we can program for them, we do. And these are examples of us doing that. So buildings that were built in the 70s are now being used not only for some of those purposes, but also for special programming. So while enrollment has declined, we've also recognized and instituted, at least at the elementary level, 14 in-district programs. If you look at the middle school, we have 37 students in 4 in-district programs, high school 50 students in 4 in-district programs, and across the district, we have programs that primarily work with our post-18-year-old students in 2 district programs. This is another impact to our budget, but it's also another impact on how we use space. So let's get to measures of success. We will get to the traditional state-mandated assessments in a moment. Every spring we give a survey to young people and parents. And last spring, I'm just going to refresh your memory, February we took masks off, and March we invited parents and families back into our building. So it was still a COVID year, right? Still socially distancing, still masked. And the spring of that year, we asked parents, so how'd the school year go for you? In a COVID year, 88% of parents said it went as expected, if not better. To me, that's a pretty good satisfaction level, right? And then when we asked about their kids, they said 85% of families said it went actually as expected and better for my kiddo. And 88% of families thought we kept a really safe environment for them. So a measure of success doesn't always have to come from a test score. These are direct voices of parents. Now let me share with you probably some room for growth for us. Last year we piloted what we're referring to as Milford measures. We asked one school in elementary, middle, and high to identify students in 5th grade, 7th grade, and 9th grade, and we asked them a series of questions. I only plucked 2 areas that I thought would be good examples of things we have to work on, because not everything is rosy and great and perfect. We have areas of improvement. We asked our kids about your sense of belonging. Do you feel like you belong in school? Do you feel like you're accepted at school? Do you feel like you're understood? Do you feel like you're respected? And do you connect with others and adults at school? At a scale of 5, I'm sorry to say that only 3.2 was the average response on kiddos saying, yes, with strong belief, I feel like I belong, I'm respected, I'm connected. 3.2 is not a good enough number for me. That's area for improvement. Another area of improvement out of a scale of 5 is student engagement. We ask questions like, how excited are you about going to school? I'm not sure if I can improve that right away, but hopefully. The second question is related to it though. How often do you get so focused on class activities that you lose track of time? And to me, these two questions talk about the engagement, the rigor, the relevance, the experiences we're putting in front of kids. So these are two data points that I feel like we have areas for improvement. Now what I'm about to do breaks all statistical rules. And I'm going to compare apples and oranges and pineapples and cantaloupes for a minute, okay? I did a 20-year look back on test scores. It used to be CMT, now it's SBA. I looked at AP and SAT. And I'm just going to ask you not to get lost in the finite number, but just kind of step back and take a look at the trend over 20 years. Okay, ready? There's CMT in 2001. We're like averaging between the 60 and 70-ish. There's CMT in 2011. We're averaging between the 60 and 70. There are our AP scores running around the 60% mark, and I'm talking about kids that are meeting grade level or benchmark expectation, okay? There is more AP data. There is some SAT math in grade 11, pretty consistent there. SAT English, again, over 3 years there, pretty consistent. There's SBA English, over 3 years, 3 grades, pretty consistent. And here we are now, SBA Math, 3 years, 3 grades, pretty consistent. And if you go back to the CMT from 20 years ago, we're still ranging between 60 and 70% of kids meeting grade level. So some of you might look at that number and say, wow, we are a really consistent school district, 20 years, very consistent. I'm not reading it that way. I'm reading it like we're pretty flat. And we need some level of healthy disruption to the system and introduction of innovation and new programming to break the trend. And that's going to come through our plans and budget proposals to add programming, to innovate. Another measure, which is going to take us a little longer to gather, is what we're calling the mastery-based experiences. And the reason why the Coastal Center at Milford Point is on here is because we are creating a 3rd grade experience for all students to go to the Audubon and have a hands-on, relevant, inquiry-based experience that we will document, quantify to some degree, quantify, qualify the child's experience, and we're going to do that in 3rd grade, and then we're going to have a similar experience when they get to middle school, and then we're going to have a similar experience when they get to high school. And in a non-fill-in-the-bubble kind of test, we're going to measure growth through children's experiences. Not a lot of money in this budget, but it is an initiative that's on the list. That's what we're working toward, those experiences. And we're going to build them in all areas, all departments, along all grade levels. That's going to be another measure. How are we doing? That's not a standardized test. These are a couple other examples of how we're expanding children's experiences and gathering data around it. We're introducing experiences, things maybe that you might be familiar with, like the egg drop experiment. Musical concerts led by musicians, experts, popular experts that came to our district to work with our young people. And we're going to continue it year after year. We're engaging in career fairs. We're administering interest surveys at a younger age. We're talking about asking fifth graders, what do you like? What do you want to do? We're going to measure that and inform what course offerings we're going to provide. We're going to increase our internships and apprenticeship experiences. So whatever a child chooses at the end of 12th grade, so I'll put you on notice, the number of students entering four-year colleges, that percentage may decrease in Milford because we're going to offer opportunities for kids to earn industry standard certifications in high school. So if they choose to go into manufacturing post-graduation, they can directly do that. We want to offer those experiences in our high school, expand the opportunity to earn work-related, industry-recognized certifications. These are a couple things coming up. This June, we're inviting graduates who have been out of school for 1 year. And we're going to grab graduates who are in college, who went straight to the workforce, who went to 2-year college, and we're going to sit them down and ask them, how do we do? And that's data that we're going to pull, hopefully year after year, on some specific measures to inform how we're doing to prepare them for post-graduation. We're also going to measure how effective our career paths are by asking kids even after graduating college about it. And we're also building a system to ask our adults in our system, so how are we doing supporting you with professional learning? Is it having any impact on you as an educator? So those are some future measures that we're building to inform how are we doing, and in essence, folks, how are we spending the resources? How are we investing the resources that we're blessed to be given? I'm going to run through these last few slides. These are just other examples of what success looks like in Milford Public Schools. We graduated 401 students last year. There's a breakdown of post-secondary plans. Year after year, we have more and more students trying AP courses. And we have students, 154 of them, being named AP scholars. So not only are they trying AP courses, they're doing well in them. Another part of our story is how well we're keeping our facilities up with the generous support of the city. And honestly, I think I can measure success in our schools every single day. I don't have to wait for a testing day in May, because we get these kinds of experiences. We get kids in plays. We have kids performing on stage, being recognized by elected officials. We have students enjoying intentional play environments, engaging with their counselors. We have upped our ante. We've revised reading instruction completely. And yes, we teach phonics and phonemic awareness, just to dispel that rumor. We have Spanish in action. We're engaging students in STEM. We have kids thinking that they're scientists at the age of 7. That's a cool data point, right? When a 7-year-old calls him or herself a scientist. So to me, measuring success in Milford happens every day, in addition to these formal measures that we look at. Thank you for listening to this extensive presentation, and we are happy to take questions.
Chairman Vitro.
Alderman Willis.
Thank you, Chairman Vitro. Through you to Dr. Kataya, thank you very much for your passionate presentation. It was awesome. So I just want to ask you, the counselor, like in a crisis, if a student has a crisis situation and they want to reach out to a mental health official, who's the first person they go to see? And then also, do students have any hesitation about going to a counselor or a social worker? Okay.
So the students in our schools have good relationships with the staff, so they're with the counseling staff, so there isn't any hesitation to come forward, which is great. Typically what will happen is the student will seek out the counselor, the social worker, or the school psychologist, depending on who they've already built a relationship with. So all three of those staff members are working with students across the population of our schools. So if someone has a crisis, they're going to contact the person that they have the relationship with. If they don't have a relationship, then it's all hands on deck, and whoever is readily available will get to that student in crisis immediately. There's no waiting, there's no wait list. They're seen immediately in our schools.
Go ahead, Warren.
Through you, Chairman Vitro. So, like the students, they come and ask for help. How many counselors does each school get? Or do they have, how many do they, like, are they spread out throughout all the schools? Or some have to go to other schools, or do they stay at the school that they're at?
We have our mental health providers assigned to a single school. At our elementary schools, we have one school counselor, one school psychologist, and one social worker. At our middle schools, we have 2 school counselors, 1 school psychologist, and a social worker. And at our high schools, we have 5 counselors, a school psychologist. At law, we have 1.5 social workers, and at foreign, we have 2 social workers.
One more. So, okay, I know that there's a demand for this now, obviously, and I guess it's less stigmatizing for the students. So they seek out the counselors, obviously, and then, so are they referred to like another agency, or does the school, you know, like any other outside professionals, or pretty much the schools are able to help?
The staff in our schools are able to provide ongoing services to the students. In some situations, we may refer to an outside agency. However, what we've been finding is extensive wait lists at the community agencies. In fact, we have parents coming to our schools and saying, I know my child needs to get some mental health support, but I can't get an appointment with anyone. Can someone in the school please work with my child? And we will accommodate that as much as possible.
Okay, I suspect too that a lot of the demand is probably a lot to do with social media. Is that, you know what I'm saying?
There's a range of reasons for why we're seeing an increase in mental health needs for young people. One of the factors is the social media and the comparisons that young people make to themselves and other people. Fewer in-person social contacts is another piece of that, but social media isn't the only thing. The comparisons have made that rock and roll music was going to be the downfall of young people, and then television was going to be the downfall of young people. So social media is not the sole reason that young people are struggling, but it's a contributing factor.
Alderman Parente.
Thank you, Chairman, through you. Good evening to all of you, and also to all of the parents and supporters of the school budget. Thank you all for being here. This has been a really interesting process. I know that the time I've taken to familiarize myself with your budget, the Board of Finance process, getting familiar with your budget book has taken me many hours of time, and also talking with all of the parents and who I can talk to personally, and I know among us we've probably all done that too. Being on the Board of Aldermen, I am so pleased to know that we have subject matter experts like you before us, that we have a strong, robust Board of Education who I know does hours, months, years of prepping and planning, so that when it comes before us, although it has gone through the Board of Finance, that we can really feel confident in what you're bringing to us with your expertise. Given the nature of how things have gone with kind of the surprising results of the Board of Finance, could each of you just give in a few sentences, a couple of sentences, one word, what that produced for you in your own opinion about the process, and what do you really need us to know sitting here tonight so that we can do right by this community with our education process with the kids? Thanks.
Thanks. I think I understand your question, so if I don't answer it correctly, let me know. We start budget process in October every year, and it consumes like the whole month of end of October, most of November, and when I tell you I go line by line, I do. I open up attachments, I look at the kind of guitar we think we're going to buy, the math program, I study it, so I'm committed to doing my job responsibly. So when I put a budget before the Board of Ed, I definitely wanted to put more in front of them this year. We have some big dreams that we said no to. And we worked on getting the number as low as possible by trimming, and in some cases undercutting. And we're a little worried about a couple of accounts that we undercut. But that's a worry for not Jim next year, but me. So when we went through the process with the Board of Ed, I feel confident that there's a dialogue and exchange and multiple nights of questions, and we keep documents of that and make it public. That process was a little different with Board of Finance this year in that we didn't get the grilling that we normally do. And I'm still in confusion as to how we came up with 258. I'm not sure what that number represents outside of, that's the highest number we've received in the last few years, so let's go with that. I don't know what to do with 258. Like, it doesn't, like, I'm used to an elected body or an appointed body saying, hey, we don't like the idea of counselors, and you have 4 counselors in this budget, times 60,000, that's 240,000. So I moved to reduce by 240,000. Like, that would make sense to me. But 258 felt random, and I'm not sure how to follow that. So as an instructional leader who will be building next year's budget, by the way, should I read that as you are never to go over 258? Like, are those my marching orders? Is that what that is? So I probably need that answer before I start building in October. Do I build for what we need, or do I build for a cap that we've been given of 258? And I'll tell you, if that's the case, then we're going to be cutting programs, because the average contractual wage increase year over year for the next 3 years is 2.71. So anything below a 271, we're cutting programming. And those are contracts that we negotiate. Many of you are familiar with employee contracts and how that works. So I'm left confused and wondering, how did that happen, and what does that mean for our future?
I think overall the process is what it is. I mean, it's spelled out in the charter, so the overall process, there's nothing to be done about that. I have to echo what Dr. Kutaya said in terms of how I felt. It did feel arbitrary, the reduction, because there wasn't a lot of questions about specific things within our budget. I disagree with her in terms of how we would build our budgets in the future. I mean, I think our charge, and it's spelled out in state statute, is that we budget for what we need. And that is certainly something that I'll continue to do as a board member. I will say that as a board, we argue over how much we're going to ask for. We don't just, take what's given to us and that's it. I have board members who think we should be more robustly, for instance, funding our buildings and grounds line. So, we have discussion about that, and what really should we what should we ask for? And, we could have asked for 2-3% more than what we came in easily. But, we really carefully considered what we felt was reasonable. So I think for me, my perspective hasn't really changed. I mean, I'm going to continue to do what I've always done in terms of my approach to our budgets.
Good evening, members of the Board of Aldermen. As you know, I've been involved with many budgets over the years on both sides of West River Street. And I've been involved with the budgets that we saw on Dr. Kataya's chart, where for a number of years came in under 2% and 0%. I've been part of building those budgets. And I can tell you that in the environment that we were in, with declining enrollment, which meant less teachers needed in the classrooms, it was somewhat easy building those budgets. But as Dr. Kataya has said, those days are over. We are not having declining enrollment anymore. Those numbers are real. And we're now faced with an economy that is nothing what it has been for the last 11 and a half years that I've been at the Board of Education. And we have the 2.58 doesn't even meet our contractual obligations. It can't work. We will go backwards. The great things that this district has been able to do under this Board of Education and under Dr. Kataya and Dr. Fieser are going to go backwards. And that's not good for our citizens. It certainly is not good for our children. And so all my years of the budgeting, I've seen all kinds of political processes. But what was most disappointing to me with the Board of Finance process is that they asked virtually no questions. It was almost as though they didn't care what Dr. Kataya's presentation was. They had made up their mind that there was going to be a 2.58% and no more. They didn't even listen. And that's what was discouraging to me, because Milford's better than that, and our system of government is better than that. So those are my thoughts. I went out on a limb. I can do that because I'm not going to be here next year. But well, I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
For me, the budget process in my role is focused on particularly the needs of students with disabilities and making sure that we have the resources in place for our most vulnerable young people. And I see Milford as a vibrant community, a kind community that accepts all people, all young people in particular. I see the grand list is growing. I see that there's a strong financial base in the community. And I think that it's important that we allocate resources to address those needs. I graduated from Fairfield University down the road. And in November, there was an article in the New York Times about how the university was allocating its funds. So I've been carrying a quote around in my budget folder since then from one of my former professors, Professor Lakeland, and he said, "You measure the common good of any community by the degree to which it prioritizes the needs of the least fortunate members. A healthy community is one where the least fortunate are given the greatest attention." And I think the children of our community need that attention that this city can provide to them. And for this body, that attention comes in the allocation of financial resources. And I hope that with the budget we've proposed, this body can see to providing those resources to our children.
Alderman Moffett.
All right, thank you for the presentation. I've got to tell you, that's the third time I've seen that presentation because I watched the finance meeting twice on YouTube, right? And I saw that. I have to agree that I was a little bit disappointed, well, actually a little bit more than disappointed with the brevity of that final finance board meeting. I thought that was quick. I was looking for clarity and some explanation on their thinking, and I didn't get it, so I can understand that. So I understand a lot about the counselors. We absolutely need counselors in this age of COVID. I do have some questions later on about the role of some of those counselors. The question that bugs me right now is this. I've watched as dozens of children and their parents have marched through here in the last 2 weeks worrying about a school closing. And I have not received a good explanation yet on why a 2% cut in a $106 million budget is cause to close the school. So I need some clarity on that.
Okay. So I'll share this answer with Mr. Riccitelli, so I'll get started. $1.8 million is a very deep cut for us. I think we've explained through the presentation on how the breakdown of 4.392% fleshes out. 3.5 million of that is in salaries. And we are a human capital driven industry. So we provide services through people. So if we were to sustain a $1.8 million reduction, if we don't close a school, that means we're reducing people. And the reduction of people would mean decimating programming. We published a 5-page spreadsheet of all the possible reductions we can make. And outside of closing a school, all the other possibilities meant impact of programming to kids. And in order to get to 1.8, you're talking about a lot of salaries. And there is something that Jim will explain more eloquently than I, in that the way teachers are paid, we're actually paying them through August. So if you're going to reduce a teacher, it's not actually $60,000 on average. It's 44 or something. So if you're going to take $1.8 million divided by 44,006, let's say, as an average salary, you're removing people, and people equal programming. So on that list are things like completely unwinding elementary world language, completely unwinding the STEM program, increasing class size at the high school, eliminating freshman sports. So it takes a lot of little bits to get to 1.8. And what we forwarded to the city is nothing extravagant in new programming. Like, I can't even say, I'll take 1.8 out of a brand new program. Like, we moved forward $3.5 million of the request is just salary increase and 4 new positions. So 1.8 cuts deeply because if we don't close a school, we have to remove a lot, many small bits, which decimates programming. That's the reasoning or the philosophy around that. Did I get that, Jim, or you want to add anything?
Sure. Through you, Mr. Chairman, to Alderman Moffett, when we received the $1.8 million recommendation from the Board of Finance, we went to work, and actually we went to work before that because we were hearing some signals. And so we took our entire budget and we looked at what it would take to come up with $1.8 million. And we put, and it's, the document you've seen before, it's on our website. It was shared with the Board of Education at 2 different workshops. That outlines in very great detail what the dollar amount that's attached to each of the programs. And so closing one of the schools has a dollar amount that we've estimated will be how much money we can save if we close that school. Each of the programs that are listed, the elementary world language program, that has a dollar amount of $311,850. Those are the teachers that teach the elementary world language. Same thing with STEM. That has a dollar amount to the teachers that are teaching in our elementary schools for STEM. So over the past 4 years that these programs have been implemented, again, as Mrs. Glennon and Dr. Kutaya said, with the support of the city, I think everyone agrees that it really puts us on the map in the state to have world language in the elementary schools. It really puts us on the map in the state to have STEM labs in our elementary schools and dedicated science, technology, and education, engineering and math teachers that are teaching those kids. But there's a dollar amount attached to it. So we, as an administration, presented to the Board of Education, if we have to come up with $1.8 million, this is the menu of dollar amounts that you can choose from. And closing a school is one of them. It's not going to be administration's decision which one of these has to go, but $1.8 million is a lot of money. And it means closing a school or going into a lot of different buckets and dismantling a lot of the programs that this board has gotten behind, thankfully, through your budget process over the years. So to turn it backwards now is a difficult thing to do, but that's a decision that the Board of Education is going to have to make, whether to close the school or dismantle these programs. The last thing I'll say is the counselors. That was one of the reasons that the Board of Finance said that they didn't believe that we needed counselors. Now, how anybody can say that with what we hear going on in the world today just baffles me. But put that aside, this board, Dr. Kutaya and the Board of Education have come to this board over the last 3 budget cycles and said we're adding these counselors because we need them for our students. And each year they're going to come off the grant in a phased-in way. So this has been the plan for 3 years, and your board has approved that plan for 3 years, but now it may be just dismantled.
Does that answer your question?
Yeah, we'll stipulate about the counselors, but the question, the further delve in, of the $3.5 million that are salary, how much of that salary, what percentage of that salary is made up of non-student facing employees?
The 3.5 million?
Yeah, is that all student facing employees? That include administrators, secretaries?
Well, 1.6 is the first year of the teacher's contract.
Yeah.
So do you define non-student facing as non-teacher? So I don't know.
Well, it'd be student facing employees can be our teachers, and in this case, counselors, students, people that interact to enhance the life of the child rather than enhance the operation of the Board of Education, for instance.
Okay.
So I'm looking for an admin budget. What is your admin budget?
So if I think about the 3.43%, that includes increases for all union, all employees. Every single employee, the almost 1,300 that we employ.
Okay. So that's admin and teachers and counselors and coaches and janitors, that's everybody.
Yep.
Okay, thank you.
So it's all outlined in the budget book on the executive summary. In my book, it's page 9, X1X. But I would argue that every staff member is in some way student-faced because they all
They all in some manner affect our students, whether it's a custodian, whether it's a lunch aide, whether it's the person cooking their meals, whether it's their principal, whether it's a central office supervisor who is overseeing the curriculum and supporting the teachers to deliver that curriculum. It is all student-faced, and all in some manner impacts the students.
Okay. And understand where I'm coming from. I see everybody here. I know what everybody's for. But the city's only got this size pie, and you guys want a slice. It's not as big as you want, but you get a slice. The fire department, by the way, wants a bigger slice too. By the way, so does the police department. Meanwhile, we have thousands of citizens out there, already saying, that's a pretty big pie. I'm not sure I can afford that. And we're just trying to find an answer that would make you guys productive and happy, and mostly the students productive and happy, and satisfy the other needs of the community as well. So that's why I'm asking these questions. I have no problem with all the stuff you guys are saying, but the city's got many needs. And I'm just trying to find a place where everybody can get a fair slice of that small pie.
We appreciate that challenge. I think, can you please stop? Stop, okay? Thank you, sorry about that. I think the breakdown on the slide, 1, 2, 3, 4 pages in, and it's a square, black and white, to me is the clearest slide I could provide you on the money side, okay? And that breaks down the 4.392%. And anything inching into the salaries, special ed, and transportation, like those are primarily fixed for us. Like, if we sustain a $1.8 million reduction, that's eating into those 3 pieces that are very hard to move. Like, so I can't reduce special ed costs. That's the kids are the kids. That's their needs, right? We're not going to do that. We're not going to reduce transportation costs because that's a contract, and, well, buses are buses. It's an expensive part of doing business as an educational system. And the salaries and benefits is the regular cost of keeping the people we have right now. So I feel like to a large point, we have a move forward budget in a way that I'm just asking, can we continue to do business as we have in the past with these increased commitments to salaries and this very small, the state mandate, which we underfunded, we know that we don't have enough money for that, and these little bits, 177,000 of system improvement. So, all right, you want us to do nothing new? All right, cut the 177, right? So we won't do anything new. We won't go into 5th grade Spanish. Like, that's not like what I want to do, but if we're looking for something, I'm not asking for anything less than 4.392, but.
Okay. I completely understand, and I sympathize with your problem. I'm just trying to come up with a number that the entire city can live with. And your explanation was helpful. Thank you.
Thank you.
Alderman Beatty.
Through you, Mr. Chairperson, thank you very much to the panel, to Dr. Kataya and the board. Alderman Moffett may have opened up a can of worms inadvertently, and he just said at his last statement, we're all trying to struggle with the numbers to come to grips when the money isn't there, but the services are needed. So this gets back to the answers that you gave to Alderman Parenti when she asked about the process, and you said you were puzzled at the Board of Finance level. At the Board of Finance level, and I'm not going out of my lane here because we're struggling. Every single person at this table across the table is listening and to the needs and struggling with, is it a finite number? There's no new money. How are we going to divvy it up? Well, we can't. If you're going to reinstate, you can't. So then what? And it begs the question of how we had a budget at some process in the charter introduced that didn't meet approved contractual obligations. I'm sorry, I'm going to say it, and say it as a question. Did the Board of Finance deliberately hold back to that 5.2% because influential others suggested that, or as you said, because that was the highest that you had ever asked and received in the past? So that was a familiar number. Did they really fully understand that the number that they gave to you, the percentage, didn't meet the contractual obligations that we as a board approved and allocated? And then what is the connection between them and the intersects, and can it be corrected? And so is there a finite amount of money, and then we're at the end of this process, we're just deciding how to do the best we can and assuage the pain? Or is there more that we can do? And it moves into why that budget was designed with the mill rate in mind, and then it's overly constricted, can't meet city needs, and we have to go back and look at it. That's the question that we ask. Or we are obligated to ask. That's our responsibility, I think.
Alderman Archeolo.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, through you. To the panel, first I did want to commend you. I think that was the most poignant and thorough presentation I've ever had as a board member, so I wanted to thank you for that. I do want to point out that it is the responsibility of this board to ask difficult questions at times without fear of being heckled or any retribution there, so I do appreciate you calling out those individuals. My question is about the counselors. I don't think anybody here can argue about the stark damage that the pandemic had on the mental health of students nationwide, not just specific to Milford. And I can absolutely understand why the increase in counselors is compulsory. Now, I don't even know if anyone on this panel is capable of answering this, but I feel like it's something to ask. In your opinion, would you feel like this significant increase in counselors, because we're going from 14 to 25, I believe, is that correct?
Hold on, let me do the math.
Sure.
One at each elementary, that's 8. 2, 6 is 14, and then the high school's 4.5? 20, 14 to 21. There you
21,
go.
sorry.
Answers in the presentation.
Okay, sorry, very good. Would you anticipate that this is a permanent need for these students, or do you think that this might be something significant to this generation of students because of what they've endured and what they've experienced, the trauma that they've experienced?
Before Ms. Glennon wants to take this question, Mr. Vincicelli, the 24-25 school year is not on that chart in the presentation, and that's the last year moving formal over. So at the end of this process, it'll be 25.
Besides the fact of COVID creating this, I say that COVID didn't create the need, COVID exacerbated the need. But in all honesty, it's a mandate. We are required as a school district to provide, this is state law, we have to provide a K-12 comprehensive school counseling curriculum that must be delivered by certified school counselors. And the certified school counselor role, it's really a redefined role. It used to be the guidance counselor. So we are required to have this curriculum in our schools, K-12. So in the past, we've only had the school counselors in middle and high school. The roles have been expanded, and every student now is required to have access to school counseling. So
in Milford, this is how we chose to address it, because we feel that this is the right thing to do, to have one school counselor in each elementary school. But it is something that, unless the state changes the law, it's still a requirement that we have to provide the services.
I don't think our young people's challenges are, and it's not just young people's, if we're going to be honest. We have families in crisis. And that, to me, is a bigger city conversation, because we just see the symptoms in our young people. And I think it just gets exacerbated also, I might be getting old here, but by technology. I think our kids don't get a break from each other. You used to be able to go home if you were having trouble at school or you were being bullied, and you'd at least have the night off from that. 24/7, our kids are experiencing social exchanges with others that may not be less than positive, and that, I think, is having a big toll on our young people.
Well said. Thank you very much.
Alderman Gurman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Through you to, I think, Dr. Kataya. Actually, I want to expand on Alderman Moffat's question. So there's a lot of talk, obviously, that, first of all, great presentation, and thank you all the crowd out there that came out in support of the budget. But there's a lot of talk that if you don't get that additional money, or that 1.8 that they cut, the Board of Finance, that you will be closing Harborside Middle School. So I don't think there was a clear answer. There was, yes, maybe, no. But that's what a lot of people are concerned with, kids, parents. Will you be closing a school, Harborside Middle School, if the Board of Aldermen does not put that back in the budget? Because it's 2/3 vote, so there's 10 votes, and that's a lot of support, and I'm not sure how everybody feels, but thank you.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair. Well, that's a direct question. I'll give you a direct answer. Yes, we would close a school. I would recommend to the board that we do that. It's not what I want. I want to be clear about that. I presented on the slide that I feel like we have hit, with the current enrollment and as we're plateauing, our sweet spot. Elementary schools at 300 to 400, 3 middle schools at 400, 2 high schools at 700. We're set. Don't mess with that configuration would be my recommendation. The fact that people are talking about Harborside is that we are crunching numbers on closing a middle school and crunching numbers on closing an elementary school. So we can't speak to what school would likely be closed, but that's likely, I'm 99% confident that that's the direction we would go in if the 1.8 is not reinstated.
As a board chair, I'll add that I think I was pretty clear in my opening remarks that that is what the board would most likely do. Again, not that we want to close a school. I don't want to close a school. We don't want to be closing schools. We don't think we should close schools. But closing a school, we have to wait. Do we close a school, or do we literally decimate the programs that we've already invested in? Those are the two choices, because there's no cutting around the edges. We don't have $1.8 million of new programming, new anything. We can't cut $1.8 million in crayons and pencils that we provide for the kids. It's a very large reduction. And I think reducing the programs would just have too big of an impact to what we've built in the public school system, and I think it would really hinder what the kids have available to them and would put the district at a huge disadvantage. So I think we've been pretty clear that all 10 board members, and unanimously, have expressed the understanding that that would be the likely outcome.
Alderman German, we have been working on the numbers, so we've been feverishly. So I also say that this is no way to close a school. Giving us 3 months to run numbers, move kids, and scare the daylights out of staff members and families. Like, this is not the way to do it. Like, we should take a year to do this thoughtfully and get input and make appropriate plans and transition kids, like have them visit their new school before they leave. Like, this is insane that we're about to close a school because of a budget cut, or reduction, sorry. Like, we should be coming to you and saying, we've done a facilities assessment and we believe we have all this great room and we're gonna consolidate. We're not coming to you for a reason, because we don't believe we can close a school. Like, that's not an efficiency. So we're running the numbers on closing a middle school right now. And I'm worried about the number. We're hitting 600 kids at the middle schools. We're talking about moving to a junior high model, which mixes kids up, and talking about moving away from a middle school schedule to a junior high schedule. And it's disheartening because we have 600 kids that we could fit in a building. Like, I've always been asked, can't you fit? Yeah, but that's not the standard on closing a school, just because you could fit the kids, cram them in there, right? So now we're going to lose our fitness rooms, that's for sure, at the other 2 middle schools. We will not have access to the fitness rooms. We're moving away from dedicated teaching spaces to shared teaching spaces. So period 2 might be world language in that space, and period 3 might be English, and period 4 might be math. Because remember all that special program I talked about? Well, those have to go somewhere. Unless we farm those kids out, which is not the right thing to do, and our special ed costs go up. So if we close a middle school, we're looking at 2 middle schools of 600 kids and change programming. And what I've been working with the board on is voice and choice and an increase in electives for young people starting in 6th grade so they can start experimenting with careers. We'll have to roll back on the elective choices. So the 1.8 is a big reduction. It's to dismantle advancement and innovation in programming. I mean, our kids are going to be in a workforce where they're working with robots. So how do we get ready for that in Milford is the question. Not with 1.8 reductions that are forcing us to close schools. We're not going to get there like that. So yes, we would close a school. We're obviously not naming it out loud. I think you could put it together, you know which middle school it would be, right? And we're also working the numbers on an elementary school.
Okay, thank you.
Alderman Brozier.
Thank you, through you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for the presentation. It's comprehensive and, fantastic. When it comes down to the workforce piece and the future of the workforce, putting that in here is great, and I'm thrilled to hear that there's a focus on that. Within that context, looking at the budget book here, the computer component here for 23-24 just seems sparse, considering, obviously, given our current budget situation, it's understandably so. That being said, it seems very minimal, and I would just love to, if you wouldn't mind just walking through it, and also why, there isn't a capital equipment request.
What page are you on?
I'm on A22.
22?
A22.
A22, sorry. So the entire computer list, is that what you're meaning?
Yeah, just a
Anything
little more explanation on it, if that's okay.
Yeah, and I actually might invite our Director for Business and Instructional Digital Services to explain where we've been technologically, and then I can address what's in front of us a little bit, okay?
Great, thank you.
So a majority of that is we've been fortunate to get what the government gave emergency connectivity fund to support our devices now. We were able to replace almost 75% of our devices in the past 2 years because of the COVID money that was given to us. So we were able to reduce that cost so that we can get to the budget that was needed. That was one of the, of course, I requested a lot more than what I got, based on that.
Understood. And with that in mind, so that would cover the capital expense with the ARPA funds or with the federal funds that came in for it. Is there maintenance costs included with that, or or should it be further reflected in here in a maintenance replacement piece?
We do all of our maintenance in-house. My technicians repair Chromebooks daily. We're out in the schools all the time fixing things. And, like I said, the emergency connectivity fund was the big piece.
Got it. And then on the server front, the lease payment for the video server and the server replacement cycle line items here, can you talk a little bit about the server situation? I would imagine security and having a state-of-the-art server is pretty important.
Yeah, so we have a replacement cycle for our servers. A lot of stuff is going cloud-based though, so that kind of helps us reduce that particular footprint on servers. But I believe the security server you're talking about is, it's our security cameras. It's for our cameras.
Okay. And obviously I would imagine that takes up an inordinate amount of space.
It's in the petabytes.
Wow. Does this cover that sufficiently? What would you, if within the construct of needing to be very cost efficient and responsible to the taxpayers, what would you want or think that we should have given that being the situation?
So as far as the server goes, no, we cut servers from me too. You're talking about the security server, right?
Yeah, just security in general for this, but also if there's video.
Yeah, so we're able to store, I believe it's around 30 to 40 days of video storage based on what we have. But a lot of that security stuff, the cameras were all cut out of the budget. That was something that we requested so that, we can get a better picture. You ever look, it's always funny to me, you see a bank robber or something, and it's the top of his head and it's completely blurry, and there's no way, I don't know how anybody ever figures it out, and that's stuff that needs to be replaced. And we took that all out of the budget.
Specifically with regard to security, we have a really comprehensive system of safety and security in the schools. We have a tremendous amount of cameras, locking doors, a real phased-in approach to security. We're not going to do anything with budget cuts that are going to impact the safety and the security of our students and our staff that are in the building. Where it's a replacement cycle, we're trying to stay ahead of the cycle so that we don't have problems with servers going down or something like that. So where we've made cuts in the budget, we believe that we have another year that we could push it down the road. But you can only do that so many times.
Understood. And so when it comes down to the, so obviously safety and security piece, understood. On the investment in the future side and ensuring that tomorrow's jobs piece is taken into account, it would be great as a follow-up just to see kind of what you think you would need in a wish list scenario on that front, knowing full well that this probably is not the budget cycle to make that investment, but it would just be interesting to see to ensure that something we're keeping an eye on, and if anything, looking out for state or federal funds that might be available on that front.
We'll be happy to think through that, and we're always looking for grants. or opportunities that the state will put forward for us. And we do have big dreams in the area of technology, starting with our youngest learners, so you'll see more of that from us to come.
Thank you.
Alderman Moran.
Through you, Mr. Chair. Good evening, Dr. Kataya, Mr. Richatelli, Mr. Brown, Ms. Glennon. You know, I'm a huge supporter of the work that you do for the Board of Ed and very much admire your thoroughness and completeness. But as a member of the Board of Aldermen, we sit here with a struggle. And to better help me make my decision on where I need to stand, I have some questions that I like to understand. First of all, you know I've been to the STEM labs, loved them. I'm a science person, big supporter of the counselors as well. So having said that, I'm looking at the funding for staffing because that is the biggest part of the budget. So to help me understand a little bit about some of those choices, I'm looking at page Roman numeral 14. So starting with the 0.8. So I know that is for the equity and engagement position, I believe. On our budget.
Are you in 14
our
or
budget,
15?
Our Roman numeral 14, 10.1b, on our budget book, which actually you don't have our
I don't
budget
get your
book.
budget book.
That's right. Wait, actually it is is this?
Okay.
Yeah, it is your budget book, sorry. I'm not good with those numbers. So are you on the page where I am, the 0.8?
Yes.
Okay. So that's the equity and engagement person?
Yes, ma'am.
Is this person also on that page 1 for under the budget where it has all schools? Is this person through across all schools?
Yes, she works in all schools. Currently, we've, because of a very specific middle school need, which you may have heard of, she is working in our middle schools with students and staff members to address some behaviors that have been demonstrating.
Mm-hmm. So incrementally, that's been increased over the course of time because it's gone up and up. So has this been the same person?
She was just hired this school year. She started in February. She's been with us a couple months. She is already working with all schools. She just has a concentration on the middle schools at this time because of a specific issue. But to use some language that's been used before, she is a student-facing individual. She works with students directly and staff members.
So can you give me like a day in the life of what does she do throughout?
Sure. And the position is evolving because she's been on board with for 3 months, and it's a new position. So a day in the life could include, she holds office hours at the middle schools right now, and the kids know her, have gotten to know her, so kids come by, stop and talk to her, talk about issues they might be having. The kids get a pass from a teacher. They work with her on talking through maybe some race-related, equity-related, discriminatory practice, feelings. A lot of our children, particularly in the middle school, that are struggling with gender identity or their own sexuality. They feel comfortable talking to her about that, so that could be part of the day. She's currently pushing in to one of our schools and doing some side-by-side work with other adults to work with kids on some specific lessons that we're entitling Calling In and Calling Out, on some language and behaviors that may be offensive to others. So she's doing some side-by-side teaching with some key adults, key members of our community in that school in front of kids. She's running professional learning. She's doing some training of staff members. More recently, she's consulting on some tough cases that we have. Some cases that include discipline, some cases that include families, So she's doing a little bit of moderating and working with individual families, kids, administrators on how to work through some of those issues. She's also doing some data mining. So in my presentation, talked about equity for access, experiences, and outcomes. We're very interested on how our evolving community, our community that's becoming less and less white and more needy in some areas, how are those students performing? So she's doing some data mining around what kids have access to AP, how are all kids doing in AP courses, data mining in the area of who's being suspended, who's being expelled, how many of our students who are chronically absent are students of color or coming from impoverished families. So we really haven't done that level of data mining that she's engaging in for us. She'll be presenting next month to the Board of Ed on what she has found so far in her 3 months on the job and where the work is going. We anticipate developing with her work an equity framework that will guide our instructional practices, our assessment practices, how we engage with families. And finally, she is gearing up to put together a community-based guiding coalition of adults that represent different sections of our city. So nonprofits, business leaders, city workers, elected officials, to come together around the work of equity, because it has to be greater than what we're doing in 14 schools. There really has to be a city lift. So she'll be leading and facilitating that guiding coalition.
Okay. So, I still have some more questions, if I may. The 4 teachers, are those 4 for the CNA program?
No, ma'am.
Oh, okay. What are those 4 for then? Because there's 4 counselors.
One is this. Oh, okay. Thanks, Jim. That's a handy one. Do you have Roman numeral 15 in our book?
Right. I do.
Okay. So if you look at the left side of that page, under 1111 certified teachers, teacher regular includes specialists, there's a breakdown of the pluses and minuses and how we get to 4. So I'll read through that. The current year additional FTE required. That means after the budget was approved, we needed to add 2 additional teachers to respond to likely elementary enrollment. So that's a +2 from year-to-year budget. So those 2 teachers are already in the system, but they were added after the budget. And that happens every year, by the way. We need an additional elementary classroom teacher for the upcoming year. The elementary world language teacher at 1.0 is the person who will round out the 5th grade. We're reducing a middle school art teacher because we don't need that teacher. We can provide services to kids in art with 1 less FTE. The 1.0 high school certified nursing assistant, the CNA pathway teacher is there. And that turns out to be a net of 4.0. And then you see the 4.0 counselors, and then 1.0 school psychologist, which actually is a trade-in from a BCBA to school psych.
So in total, will you have 4 CNA instructors then? Is that how that reads?
So, I'm sorry, that can be a little confusing. So the 4 is the net change. When you take 2 plus 1 plus 1 minus 1 plus 1, that's 4.0.
Oh, for teachers, whereas counselors changes the subject line, sort of, so to speak. Okay.
There probably should be a space between there. I'm sorry.
So does Foreign have a CNA program too, and law, or what's the status of the CNA program?
Can you repeat that?
The CNA program at the high school. Do both high schools have the CNA program? You said you want to expand that, so you have 1 teacher here. So what is that status?
Both high schools have a CNA program. We're seeing an increase in interest, so we wanted to respond to be able to offer additional sections for kids, and a total of a 1.0 FTE there.
So is that to 1 school, split school, what?
I don't have that detail. I'm sorry. We can get that to you. I'm sorry.
Okay. And you don't know how much more of an interest that is, that it qualifies to have another full-time person to do that? You said more people are interested, so will you have enough people enrolled?
We have enough teachers for the current enrollment.
Right.
I heard in our conversations with our STEM teachers that the interest has doubled.
Doubled, okay. And have you thought about clinical placements for some of those too? Because that's been an issue, like in healthcare, for clinical placements for healthcare.
We're able to clinically place our kids now.
Now you are, yeah, but if you're going to double that, that's just a little.
I'm
FYI,
sorry I don't have
yeah.
more of an answer to this
Yeah,
for you, but
that's
I
okay.
certainly can
That's-
get one for you.
Yeah, that's okay. Okay. And then as far as your non-certified staff, the 2.20, so that's explained on the other side of that page, 15, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And some of those were just shipped from different categories as
Yes.
well, correct? Okay. All right. Okay. I have more, but I'll let it go at that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Chairman Vitro?
Alderman Willis.
Yes, thank you, Chairman Vitro, through you. I believe this would be Dr. Kataya. There's a huge increase in absenteeism from what I gather.
Yes. It's almost double, right, Mr. Brown?
Almost double since.
Chronic
COVID.
absenteeism. Chronic absenteeism is defined as, so we just did this 2 nights ago, 10%, more than 10% of a school year, so that's more than 18 days.
Wow, okay. I have a few more questions to this. So,
That is a national, statewide trend, by the way, where it's not Milford only.
oh, statewide, it's not
Yep.
national?
I can't speak to national, but I know it's state.
Okay. Yeah, I'm sure there's, obviously and understandably to myself, there's many reasons why absenteeism does exist. How does that, or is increasing, how is that dealt with? What's the process when okay.
So we have in place a building attendance review committee at each of our schools, and we also have a district attendance review committee. The district committee meets monthly, as do the school committees, and what we do is that's a time when our school counselors, our social workers, our school psychologists, and we also include our school resource officers. We will contact the families, speak with the parents and guardians to figure out what are the hurdles that are getting in the way of students coming to school. We will make home visits to the families so that we can have contact with the student and the parents and guardians and work together collaboratively with the parents to get those students to return to school. It's an ongoing process. There's a broad range of reasons that children have a difficult time coming to school. I won't get into all of those reasons. Some are quite personal for these families, but we do work with them and do the best we can to get them to return to school. And in most cases, we're successful, but it is a challenge for some families.
Okay, just one more question. It's sort of random. I'm just curious, like, is there, like elementary, middle school, high school, the academy, is there any like noticeable different, like a spike at any, like elementary school or high school? Is there like a number that's higher percentage?
Attendance is better at elementary school. It's easier for parents to get elementary school students to come to school, for sure. So I think it's a greater concern at the middle school and high school levels.
How about at the academy? Is that?
So that's interesting. Some students were having attendance difficulties that were notable, and then when they get to the academy, that improves. That's a testament to the structure of the academy, the small community, the welcoming community that's created for the students there. So some students struggle until they get there, and then it improves. There are still some young people at the academy who struggle with attendance, but we do see improved attendance, which is one of the goals of a placement at the academy.
Yeah, the Academy is certainly a great program, and I'm glad we have that now. I don't know, 20 years maybe, or maybe more, I don't really know. Seems like that long. Is there a danger, I think I might have heard it someplace, that the Academy is in danger of closing if this $1.8 million budget cut, or is that something that I'm off on?
It's on the list.
Thank you. Even it's, yeah, okay, thank you.
Alderman Marlowe.
Good evening. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you. First to the panel, the board. Great presentation, as always, and I'll say it again. Thank you for putting the frequently asked questions in the back because it eliminates a lot of questions. Next time, if I could have this first, or sooner, because it answered questions as well, because well, first let me just make a comment as well about the budget process itself. While everyone may not like what the outcome was of it, I think the process is needed. It's required. It's a checks and balance system. So I don't want to throw it out because we didn't get the results that everybody wanted. So comment as far as the budget process goes. But when I looked at the budget this year, and Dr. Kataya, I believe you said it, I didn't want to be that guy, that older guy that says, hey, it's not the same as when I went to school. And I really struggled with that, to be brutally honest here. And I'm struggling a little bit with, you know, just the decision making, because I'm always going back and saying, well, do we really need all these things? So when I looked at this budget, I spent a lot more time looking at the vision, the goal, the mission statement of the school system, because in my mind, that's what the budget is supposed to make happen, right? So I had to look at it a little differently this year. And again, do you feel that the budget as it is right now is meeting what your vision and goals are? I went through the last, I pulled out the books from the last 3 years or whatever, or 4 years, whatever I still had of the Board of Education budget, and looked at the vision and looked at the goals, and we're headed in a certain direction with this that I see. And I know things are changing. So I guess I'm looking at this and saying a lot more is being placed on the school system from, I'll say, society in general. Society is, I dare say, demanding certain things of the school system now that you guys are now having to meet. So I guess my question is do you feel that what you have right now is going to get you to where you need to be to at least meet the goals that you're trying to set forth?
So we held back and deferred a lot, Alderman Marlowe. I didn't bring to you everything we needed. And that's a conversation that I need to have with my Board of Education before next January, and a conversation that we may need to have as a bigger community. We're not going to find savings in FTEs anymore, but we have dreams for our young people. I want to add more programming and innovative stuff. Like I want us to be that city that gets attention in the state. Like, oh, what's Milford doing? And I commit to you in the city that I will constantly be looking for efficiencies and areas where we could save and trim away. But for right now, we will be at 4.392. We'll move forward with doing great things for kids next year. But there will be things each year that will come to you with asking for support.
Right, I guess that's where I'm going to ultimately be headed with this. when you were speaking, you had a lot of different ideas that, you know, you would, as the school system would like to do. And I know that there's a price tag associated with every one of those things. So how do you see the budget going to make those things happen? I know it goes up, I get that. But how much do you see it increasing? Is it just, hey, I can only do, again, this much, and that's what I'm going to do, so it's going to increase by X? Or what do you see? I mean, you know, for instance, you wanted the industry standard certification.
Yeah.
I get it, but what does that really mean, and what's the price tag associated with doing that? Is it more staff again?
Well, for that specific question, we're going to need to train staff, likely revise our curriculum, and likely buy some equipment for some very specific areas. So in that regard, we may already have the staff in place. It'll just mean training and stuff. But let's talk about world language for a minute. I'd like us to get to the point where we're offering more than just the French and Spanish and Latin at the high school. Our world language team is ready to move on Mandarin. And this is a great example in that if you offer Mandarin, you're not going to remove French, right? It's an and, not an or. So in some cases, that'll be an additional FTE.
Just to go back, I've heard about Harborside, and if it remains open, I'm assuming, I've also heard that there's a lot of work that needs to be done to that school. Maybe that's rumors. I've kicked around, I've heard $28 million or so need to be put into that school. What is it that needs to be put into that school?
So we have a capital improvement plan that we work with the Board of Education to approve and then bring to the mayor annually, and then the mayor makes decisions and moves forward items to this body. Through that process, we've identified the renovations of our schools, and currently we're grateful that we are renovating and adding on a couple classrooms at Pumpkin. And there are 3 schools left in the district to renovate. And that will be Harborside, Cav Penn, and Live Oaks. And in all honesty, Harborside was not next on the list. We met with the principals of the 3 schools, and we made a decision to move Harborside up because it is, in my professional opinion, that the programming at Harborside is delivered differently than East Shore and West Shore because of their facilities. And what we're able to offer kids, and will in the future, based on our dream for middle school, will be different at Harborside because their facility can't support some of the things we want to do in tech ed and art and music and some of those electives. So we chose to move Harborside up next for consideration for renovation. I'm not sure what year it was built in.
67, I believe.
Mr. Riccicelli is guessing 67. It's more than just a facelift. We need to add some space there, revisit some of these specialty area spaces. And we're estimating, this is an estimate, it's way before it ever went to an architect, that would be $28 million. Behind that, though, are renovations to Cav Penn and Live Oaks, too. So we have 3 more schools left. That's how we're looking at it.
Mr. Chairman, if I could have a couple more questions. So having said that, and then I heard about possible, did I hear junior high type setup, and would that affect a school? How would that fit in from just from a building standpoint?
Well, I would not want to entertain a junior high model unless forced to. I think programmatically and experience-wise, that's not the direction to move in, but that's also an example of an impact of closing a school and cramming kids into a building. So the junior high model would only apply if we had to close a building.
Okay, I'm sorry, I misunderstood then
Yep.
when I heard junior high, that was something you were
No, glad you asked.
pursuing. Just if we could go back to the counselors 1 second. And my question is more, I don't think we have an answer, all the answer, as to why children seem to need more emotional support. I know there's varied reasons for it. During the process, when do the parents get involved? If a child goes to a counselor and says, whatever the issue is the parent then contacted?
In almost every case, the parent is contacted immediately. We recognize that there needs to be collaboration between home and school, and that children's problems are addressed most successfully when their parents or guardians are involved. There are rare instances where a child is at risk because of the actions of their parent, and that child may come forward seeking assistance. And in those situations, we wouldn't contact the parent immediately because the parent or guardian, unfortunately, sometimes poses a risk to a child. But other than that, we would be in touch with the parents as soon as we could.
Thank you. One last, well, I have other questions, but one last one for right now is, so when, Dr. Kataya, when you look at programs and where you're going, and you've had programs in place for a long time, are you constantly evaluating those programs and saying, you know what, this was great and it worked, but it's no longer needed, you know, so you're always looking at that, correct?
Yeah, on a regular basis, I think we need to do a better job at that, but we are doing that. We just put in a database system that is much more user-friendly than what we've had. And we're starting to access some student achievement work as we go through the year and not having to wait for standardized assessments. So as recent as today, we were looking at some literacy achievement scores of elementary students and making decisions about how to program for those young people, particularly in early literacy foundational skills. So something as academic as that, we are using data to inform how to not just modify and adjust, but really take a look at systemically how's it working.
So do you have a number as to state mandated what those costs are overall? I mean, if you were to say how many, you know, this X, Y, and Z are state mandated and this is what it costs.
There is a document that I think our organization has published. I'll try to get my hands on it, but this data point was just shared with me, intriguingly. Since 2000, today's 23, right? Sorry, just doing math. 2018, there have been 115 mandates passed by the legislator in the field of education. And this is a couple of weeks ago. There were 71 bills in front of our legislators related to education. We're really seeing a spike in lawmakers putting their hands on educational issues.
Just maybe.
So actually, I'm going to take advantage of that question for a minute. We are facing, you know, something in the background. There's the right to read legislation has come out, has been looming over us. I have been very transparent about fighting that impact on Milford. I don't believe that buying one of 6 packages is going to help kids read or fix a reading gap in the state of Connecticut. I feel like what we are doing is working. So we've applied for a waiver. We may find out this summer, but unlikely sometime next year. If we're not approved for the waiver, and for those of you who don't know, the Right to Read Act requires school districts to adopt one of 6 package reading programs. It doesn't matter what your scores are, it doesn't matter what you've done in your curriculum. it is a blanket requirement for you to have to adopt one of 6 programs. Startup costs alone for Milford are over $1 million. So if we're not approved for a waiver, we're coming to you because of a state mandate that I can't get out of, even though I've tried, asking for $1 million just to implement a reading program in its first year. And that was done with all good intent, and I testified somewhat against and for the bill, because there's part of it to extend the timeline, so I supported that, but I spoke against the actual implementation. So I think it was done with good intent by legislators. No one was trying to do that to 160 plus school districts, but requiring a program adoption to fix a reading gap in the state is not how I think we should go about fixing that.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Alderman Archeola.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, through you. If indeed the budget passes as is and Harborside does close, that does, in the short term, represent a one-time savings. And I would imagine that for the next year, there are going to be costs associated with redistricting the kids that would have gone to Harborside, because it's going to increase the capacity of the other 2 middle schools by 50%, if I was reading those ideal numbers correctly. Can you go over the costs that would be associated with redistricting those kids and what that might cost us in future budgets? We were just getting to the good part.
Sorry, that was cut out of the budget.
All right. Yes, I'll do my best. There are costs associated with closing a school, as well as many savings. On the presentation that we gave to the Board of Education, we have some of those costs, like there will be increased transportation. So kids that now have to go further, so there's increased costs for transportation.
Is there anything you can estimate?
I'd rather get back to you. We are working on that for the Board of Education. They've asked us to look at all of the costs, not just the savings, but look at all of the costs. There's going to be, over the summer, there's going to be increased custodial costs. There's going to be moving. We're going to have to hire a moving. We're going to have to, in all likelihood, hire a consultant to help us with the redistricting process. So there are going to be additional costs associated with if we had to close the school. As I said, we're working on that for the Board of Ed, so we'll make sure that you get a copy of whatever we give to the board.
I just have a follow-up question, if that's okay. Can East and West Shore physically handle the increased capacity, or would that require construction?
Well, as Dr. Kutaya said, we can fit the kids into the building. We can make it work. It will require no longer dedicated classrooms for certain things. Those kinds of things can happen, but we haven't really looked at the long term, what it means for additional construction. At this point, we would, obviously, if we're forced to, it's going to be 3 months and we have to make the move. So we're going to have to make it happen. And then there will have to be an evaluation of, is there anything else that's needed so that we can support the kids educationally while they're at the new school.
And I just want to underscore that, not to lose this point that you said, it is a one-time savings. That we're coming back with the same base and an increase next year. That's pretty sure we're going to do that.
And one last follow-up question, and this is, I guess, a difficult question that I don't know if anybody really wants to ask, but I think it might be on some of our minds. I think a lot of us are looking at this as a boom or bust situation, but I feel like I should ask, is there a number cut that the Board of Education can withstand where that doesn't result in Harborside closing?
So I appreciate that question, and I was warned that you might ask it. Not you personally, but you plurally. And I think I did address that we have a lean, mean proposal here. Like, we had a hard time getting it to 439. So I want just to say that out loud again, that we did not move forward to use something that we feel like there's fat on it, okay? But if you're gonna reduce anything, I'll let the state know we're not implementing our mandates for a year. So you could take the 155. We'll figure something out. And we'll put a on hold and deferment on any of those system improvements. So we might skip a year of world language, Spanish. I don't know if I could commit to not doing the math program in middle school. I think I'm going to have to figure something else out. I can't not implement what's really good for kids there. I just can't. So, because you're forcing my hand, I would take a look at the 177 and the 155 on that list. So whatever those two numbers add up to is 12, 13, 332.
And please don't misunderstand that question as a desire to, like, have a strong opinion one way or the other. I feel like it's a difficult question that needs to be asked when we're looking at all of our options. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Chairman Vitro.
Alderman Moffett first.
Yeah,
then
first of
Willis.
all, I appreciate your frankness in saying that school's got to be closed. And nobody here wants to have a school closed. I also know there are a lot of state mandates that are not paid for. I have a question about, I think it's ECS, educational cost sharing. How does that work? Because I know we get dollars from that. I'm not sure if they're incorporated in this budget or not.
Alderman Moffett, the education cost sharing grant goes to the city, and it's booked as revenue in the city side of the budget to help to help defray the costs that the city puts toward education. But it's only about somewhere around $9.5 million off the top of my head, and obviously it doesn't come close to meeting the needs of education in the community. And that there is, I'm not sure if it's passed or if there is a bill to reconfigure the ECS, but in that particular formula, Milford loses. Many districts will do better, but Milford loses. So, it's hard to say that, we probably only get 5% through that ECS grant, 5% of what Milford spends on education, but it seems kind of counterproductive to say, let's hope they don't mess with it because we'll take the 5% instead of them cutting it on us.
I understand, and unfortunately, a lot of those grant programs work counterintuitively. The better you manage, the less money you get, and that's the case here in Milford. But any money we get, and from what I understand, it is a pass-through. It goes through the city government, it goes straight to the Board of Education. Any dollars that we get, even for a few $100,000, will get you close to your 1.8 million. Is that correct?
No, it doesn't go to the Board of Education. It goes to the city.
Right, but can't the city then pass it through?
You may be talking about the excess cost grant.
Maybe I
They're
am.
close. The ECS is the Education Cost Sharing Grant, which goes directly to the city and doesn't come to the board at all. There is the excess cost grant, which is for special education costs. There's a formula attached to it, and you're eligible for a certain percentage. Maybe Chris can give the percentage over what we have to spend in order to be eligible for dollars to come back.
For the excess cost grant, for students that are exceedingly expensive to educate, if the cost of educating a student exceeds 4.5 times what our per pupil expenditure is, then we get some money back from the state. So if our per pupil expenditure was $20,000, 20,000 times 4.5 would be $90,000. So if we were paying $100,000 for a student, we would get a percentage of $10,000 back for that $100,000 we spend. And so it would be around $7,000 for the $100,000 that we spend. And that's a summary of how the grant works.
But for the way my brain works, if I've got a bucket of money that we can allocate to a certain amount to education, and that bucket of money is going to grow, then maybe we have more money to shell out. I'm just wondering if more money is coming in that's not accounted for right now.
Actually, the excess cost grant money does come to the city, and then each year we have to send a letter to the mayor asking for the amount of money back to cover whatever deficit we have in the special education account. Some years we haven't had to ask the city for any money back, and that money gets included in revenue for the city of Milford. For instance, last year in 21-22, we did not have, we had a small deficit in the special education accounts. So the state sent $1,250,000 to the city. We only asked for $332,000 back. So the city booked in revenue $917,420. That stays on the city side. It doesn't come to the Board of Ed. And over the course of the last 10 to 12 years, there are some years that there's no money that the city keeps, and then there's other years that the $900,000 was the most, and then like 18-19 there was about $400,000, and it goes down from there. I have a document that I could send to you that we will do that.
And I'm just looking for money anywhere we can find it. So
sure.
Alderman Willis.
Thank you, Chairman Vitro. Through you, this is kind of a statement, kind of a question statement thing. Obviously closing a school is not very good for the children and the students to do that, emotionally or whatever. And they're, being in the school, they're that's a school they've been going to. So, that, and it ties in with the counselors, and then if they have to go to another school, there's other issues probably with that where, there's risk for other crisis situations because of the change to another school. So I don't know, is there any studies on that have been done, the impact of children on when a school is actually closed?
Not that I have encountered.
Okay, thank you.
Alderman Beatty.
Through you, Mr. Chairperson, thank you, and to each of you. I think there's a lot of misunderstanding about the educational cost-sharing account, and I think that sometimes as alders we haven't messaged it well, and there's a lot of feeling in the community about Milford manages well, and then they are cheated by the educational cost-sharing account. But if not by the Board of Ed, but by people in the community. You mentioned Alderman Moffett if we do well and then you get punished by, you don't get it. But if I'm understanding it correctly, it was higher court mandated that the educational cost sharing formula be redone by the legislature, and that has been redone, and the criteria used are such things as number of children below the poverty line, number of children who do not speak English in the home as their primary language. There are a number of indicators which would make Milford be less eligible for educational cost sharing. So you wouldn't want to go there and meet those criteria more in order to get more cost sharing. So I think it's up to us to understand it, the Board of Alders, to onboard about what it is, what it means, so that when we are cut, if we are, there are reasons for that. And sometimes as our indicators are better and more improved, we'll be less eligible because it's a fund for primary education supplemented by the state for those who really need it. Is that correct? We can anticipate that maybe you will get less monies in the future because of the formula.
Yeah, well, actually, in the budget book, on page A18, is the historical, what the city has gotten in the ECS. So you can see in 2021, it was roughly $10 million. In 21-22, it was 9.6 million. And this year it's staying, in 22-23, it's staying relatively flat at 9.6. But I believe that next year it's going down another tick.
Right.
Yeah. So I think, and the ECS formula is a massive formula. I wouldn't even begin to try to figure it out. And I know that many times over the years, the state has looked at that formula, and it never really has changed all that much. It comes down to how much money the state has to give toward education, and they never fund the full obligation. Yeah.
Those are all issues, but here in Milford, we're hiring people for diversity, equity, and inclusion, and we see that. And some of what they're trying to do with the formula with ECS is to address those issues. So we should understand it more and message it better, I think, is what I'm saying. And it doesn't always represent that we're not being fairly treated. It's that it's all changing. And it's an issue to address anyway.
Alderman Vitale.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, through you. First of all, Dr. Kataya left. And I just wanted to thank her for her presentation. Mrs. Glennon, thank you. Mr. Brown, Mr. Redistricting, thank you for being here tonight. I also have to applaud the parents in the audience for their perseverance and consistency. As I used to say in PPTs when I was dealing with parents, Dr. Kataya, thank you for an excellent presentation this evening. As I said, way back when in PPTs that I used to say to parents that you are your kids' greatest advocates. Don't ever forget it, and don't lose that concept. As I'm hearing things around here, I'm in a very difficult position. A little ancient history, okay? We had 21 schools in this system. We've gone through 5 closings. We've gone through RIF in the years past. We've went from a K-8 program. I lived a K-8 program. I lived a K-5, K-6, middle school. In 1991, I think we went over to the middle school model, and the purpose was to give kids choice. So they came out of elementary school, and on each individual there was an evaluation as to how and what they were doing, and the counselors, that's another thing, counselors and school psychologists worked together to find out what the schedule would be, whether they were going to be taking Spanish. And if they didn't read very well, they were considered struggling readers. So they went to middle school with the choice of getting into a reading program. So what I'm trying to say is there really wasn't very much choice. And as things grew and evolved, the middle school began to take that mode. But I was in the middle school, and we still didn't have the choices that kids have today, which is a fantastic program going on. The idea of counselors and nurses, we shared a nurse, and the biggest problem was that when that nurse wasn't in that building, I was that nurse giving out medications, and the liability giving out medications was awesome. Counselors, we shared counselors maybe once or twice a week coming into the building. And yet nothing's really changed because kids go, and parents and families go through emotional instability at some point in time. And you know, we never realized the gravity of mental illness because you don't see that bandage around your head and nobody knows you look different, you don't look any different, but the emotions that you're going through, kids weren't getting the help that they needed. We finally got to the point where we had a nurse in a building. We finally got to the point where maybe we're sharing counselors less than we had to, other than maybe 2 or 3 days a week. Things stay the same. We fought the Board of Finance the same way you went to the Board of Finance, and they made these miraculous decisions to cut. Why? How? Why? We never knew. To today, you don't know why. Part of the problem, it's an appointed board. It's an appointed board. There are a lot of issues that, you know, as I'm thinking about all of these things, they ask the questions. And probably at this particular point in time, if we go on any further, I'd like to get into student performance a little bit. When we had CMTs, we had, Live Oak School, we did Levin's accelerated school model, which brought in parents, which brought in every aspect of the community in the school, whether the custodians was on a committee, the lunchroom people were on committees and everything else, and we worked as a team to create problem-solving issues, or to try to solve some of the issues that were coming up and above. I could remember that we celebrated that my fourth grade, and the CMT was judged on goal, below goal, proficient, and above goal. We had 100% of our fourth graders reaching goal in writing, so that was a tremendous accomplishment. To me, that was high-quality instruction. We did have high-quality instruction. We have people in the community who went to through that K-8 program with high-quality instruction because teachers delivered instruction in a way that was creative and didn't have the supplies that we had today. Budgets were not, as they were. We were talking about $80 million budgets, $790 million budgets rather than $106 million budgets. Plus, what people don't realize, and just the realization, not only are we dealing with the Board of Education budget for $106 million, but that doesn't include the payment, salaries, and bennies of the nurses in the building. That doesn't take care of all of the health issues. So that budget can run, and I think Jim, I think you clarified it in one of the appendixes. I think, what did we run, about 135 million, 130 million? Somewhere around there. So this is not a $106 million budget. We're talking a $135 million budget. So my question is, we all see things differently through a lens of today and what we need, and the different expectations, the different needs of kids, the different needs of families. But we also met those needs. We tried to meet those needs way back when. Dr. Kataya, can you help me understand, when we had CMTs and we knew what the goal was and how kids were achieving above goal and they were functioning at goal or whatever the case might have been, when we talk about district performance index, what goes into the district performance index to make up the number that the state is recommending that we achieve?
There are 12 factors that contribute to the index, and it's much greater than what was considered during CMT times. CMT days, we took a look at, did you hit the mark or not? It was no child left behind days. You either make the mark or you don't, and if you don't, you're punished. The DPI now is based on a fixed performance as well as growth. So it takes a look at each child, cuts across a standardized scale regardless of grade, and determines if the students in Milford have demonstrated adequate growth. There are also indicators that focus on how our students with high needs are doing. There are indicators on how students do on physical fitness assessments, access to the arts, graduation rates, how many kids take 4 years compared to 6 years. Just did this report a couple weeks ago. Happy to send you the video on that, Alderman Vitale. We review our accountability report and our performance and profile report.
I'm seeing this. The state is recommending 75?
I'm sorry, I was chatting.
Is there a recommendation of a 75?
75 on each indicator, and then based on the points you attain in each category, you get certain percentage points, and then you add that up to get to a DPI.
Right. So as I have it, and I think this is the latest, that within the language arts, where it says English language arts, obviously it's 69 or 67.9%. So we're achieving about 68%. In the math,
I don't know if you can interpret it that way. Sorry. That's it. Do you mean 68% of kids are at level?
In our district, right? 67 or 68, around 68% in language arts. About 64%, or the number, I shouldn't say 64%, whatever that number is, right. It's 64, and then in science it's 64. So we're not achieving that, we're a good 11 points off of that.
Well, the goal is to get to 75, right?
So is that a higher percentage, or is that a really a big reach?
No, I think it's attainable. I think we were actually doing quite well pre-COVID. We were hitting those marks. I think the report you're using is based on 21-22, right?
21-22.
Right.
Yes.
So you're looking at data that's about a year old, and kids just being out of mass for a month. So if we're going to be fair, I'd like for you to go back pre-COVID and to talk about assessments then.
Okay, so what were those numbers pre-COVID, and obviously this is...
Well, they're better than that. I don't have that memorized.
Okay. No, that's great. I didn't know
And Alder Vitale, I will go on record, and I have with our board, while that is one indicator, I'm not going to be driving our school system into a path of let's increase that number. So I was around for CMT days too, and while there was a lot of high quality instruction, there was also a lot of teaching to the test. And we're not doing that in Milford. We're going to focus on the Milford measures that I presented this evening. We're going to get kids out to the Audubon and experience life that way and measure improvement across grade levels through quality experiences. My theory of action is that if we invest in that kind of learning, our test scores will take care of themselves. So while we'll keep an eye on those measures, there are other measures that we're also going to keep an eye on that I think will tell the more full story than kids filling in a bubble on an answer of a comprehension test. Okay, so it's an and for me, not just that one area, that one test.
Right. So again, it's an indicator.
One indicator.
So in relationship with CMTs, when there was a school goal, principal goal, and I think we still deal with goals, do we not? Or I don't even know at this point.
We have goals, yes.
Okay. And so a lot of those goals were geared to improvement on CMTs, whatever the category, whatever was math, language arts, whatever we were deficient in at that point. Is there such a process at this point? Do we at all take into consideration whether it's a number or how we get there, the state is looking at what we're doing and what we're not doing, whether we like it or not. But the point is there other goals that are being set by the system, by you,
Yes.
as a trickle-down effect through the principals?
Teacher and principal and administrator goals have student academic achievement goals. Now, I will say through a waiver through the state for the last 3 years, for 3 years, there has been a focus on social emotional learning goals because of what we've experienced in COVID.
Okay. Just to change the subject a little bit, the other question is with the grants, with the ARP and ESSER 1 and 2. How many positions have we hired regarding the grants with the grant money?
My public commitment was to hire counselors and a supervisor for equity.
Okay, so how many positions total?
We keep going into this math problem. 14, 12, one at each elementary and
21?
one at each middle. So that's 11. 11 plus 1 is 12.
12.
I'm sorry, it's getting late.
Sooner or later, that number is going to catch up with us.
So with great clarity, we told you that. Like when we did this 3 years ago, we said out loud, we're hiring 11 counselors, and for the next 3 years, and a supervisor, for the next 3 years, we're going to onboard 4, 4, and 4. Mm-hmm. Well, last year we did 3, I think. First year, right? And so we were transparent that, and we didn't intentionally create a funding cliff. We didn't go and hire more people.
No, agreed. I just wondering when
But I don't understand the comment about it's going to catch up to us.
Well, meaning that one of these days, ESSER funds, how much further down the road are these grants?
There's just one more year of impact.
1 more year. So that becomes a line item on your budget.
It already is.
But
we moved
for
for 2 years. We've moved them over to general fund.
Okay, but so we're still getting funds. We're still getting those grant monies. So
they expire in 24.
Right. So they're sort of offsetting within the budget itself, anyway. Whether
Only
it's a position.
4 more positions.
Right. So we're going to be taking on that as completely in 24, after 24, are we not?
Well, hopefully after this process, 2/3 of the way we're done.
Okay.
So yes.
So it'll be expended at that point, and hopefully that will be able to afford and keep those positions at that particular point in time.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Alderman Ferrante, sorry.
Thank you. Thank you, through you, Chairman. A couple of different things. Could we go back to the excess cost grant? So I know you were mentioning with ECS, which I understand the distinction, that goes right into the general fund. And the excess cost grant sounds like if there is any money left over, it's used as revenue for the city side of the budget.
Correct.
And over time, amortizing that's a significant amount of money. Is that correct? You had a figure, I think you mentioned?
Yes, I'll send the board the listing from the last 11 or 12 years of what came in from the state, what we requested from the city, and then what the city kept for revenue.
So that never flows back to the education side? Okay, all right. Once it's over on the city side.
Yes.
And so for those of us not familiar with how the accounting works with your budgeting, what happens if there is a little bit of surplus left? Does that reside with you? Does that carry over? Can you explain that to us?
You're not asking specific to excess cost, right?
Yeah, I've
general.
moved off that, yes. Now, just to generally speaking, if there's, in your budget, if there's money left over, should there be any amount, does that carry over to the next budget cycle? Okay.
No.
How does that work?
At the end of the year, whatever money is not expended by the Board of Education would lapse back to the city. But that doesn't happen. I mean, in all reality, we spend the money that the city gives us. There is one exception to that. The state legislation does allow for a 2% non-lapsing account be set up by the city, and we have taken advantage of that 3 times in the past. In 2012, 2014, and again, I believe in 2018 or 19. Yeah, 2020. So the 1 year we had a surplus, and by law, you have to come to the Board of Finance. The Board of Education has to go to the Board of Finance, request permission to set up the fund, and then it's up to the Board of Education to spend those funds for the specific reason that they gave to the Board of Finance. So in 2012, anticipating that we were going to need a resurfacing of the football fields at both Jonathan Law and Foreign, and that was going to be a huge amount of money, we had a surplus that year. We asked the Board of Finance to set up an account. It was about $450,000 that was then spent on the future cost of those fields. When we had redistricting and reconfiguration in the 14-15 years, we knew that there were going to be costs. Similar to what Alderman Archiola asked before, there were costs associated with that whole reconfiguration and redistricting. We went to the Board of Finance and asked them to put aside $300,000 that would be used specifically for the costs of redistricting and reconfiguration. That's what we spent it on. The last time was COVID year. We knew that there were going to be extraordinary expenses for COVID. We also knew that because schools closed down, there were some savings, natural savings. So we took those savings and put it into the non-lapsing fund, which was approved by the Board of Finance, and used it to offset some of the costs of COVID over the last couple of years.
Thank you for that. And then through you, Chairman. And speaking of COVID, I just want to mention my colleague Vitali, we were talking about the fact that over the span of years and generations, there have been emotional difficulties that have come up for families and children in the school system. But we have just been through an unprecedented event that has not been something that has been faced before. And I think just anecdotally and just hearing all of the parents and the other advocates the kids aren't doing okay, and we have to invest in them. We have to make sure and ensure that they know that they are supported, and it's not just by a teacher or another person in the school district. It's a whole robust process. So I commend you for the work that you've done to implement that. You were very clear and transparent about that with us over the course of the last budgets. It was very understandable how you described it, that the ESSER money would be funding it and that you would be working to avoid a fiscal cliff so that by the time we got to 2024, we would have just that last 4 to implement. And it is an asset to our whole community to make sure that our kids are taken care of and that their families are supported too. And the only other thing I'd like to mention right now is, let's see, hold on, I just wrote down what I said here. Someone else mentioned checks and balances. And I will just speak personally for myself as an alderman. I don't know that that system worked properly this time. I don't feel that when it has come to us that we are now understanding from you, but not through the process until now, why this arbitrary amount was cut from the budget. And if you have any more insight to provide to us as to how that number was arrived at, that would be terrific to know. But I'm still at a loss to understand how that number came to be. Thank you.
Alderman Gurman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Through you again to the board. Alderman Vitale touched on some of the other costs to the education budget. you know, in addition to the 106 or 104, however you look at it, there's 32 million coming out of our coffers. That's to pay school debt, nurses, and a majority of that chunk goes to health insurance. So like 25 million goes to health insurance just on the Board of Ed side. And this probably goes to you, Mr. Richtelli, is what is the cost share for health insurance? And a follow-up question on that, as well as we all know we're self-insured, the city is self-insured. What are we doing to keep our health insurance or help people healthy on the educational side, the teacher side? What are we doing to keep them healthy and better care so they're not running to the doctors all the time and
Sure.
costing a fortune? Thank you.
Yep, you're welcome. Over the past 5 to 6 years, we've transitioned virtually all of our employees from a regular PPO health insurance plan to a high deductible health plan or an HSA, health savings account. That in itself is an incentive for the employees to take care of themselves, to go to get their well visits because they don't pay for the well visits. It also is a decrease in the cost, but the greatest benefit to the city is going to happen in 30 years from now when our other post-employment benefits, OPEB liability, is greatly reduced by having that HSA in place. So the PPO plan is much more costly to the health insurance plan. The HSA plan is less costly. It's paid for differently. The employees have a deductible that they have to meet first, and then after that, the city's health insurance monies kick in. I believe that the city is also going to those. And as far as the cost share, it varies by union group. The teachers and administrators are up close to the 18 to 20% range. And I believe that our lower paid employees, like the paraprofessionals, the custodians, and the secretaries, are somewhere around 13, 14% cost share for the HSA program.
Thank you, through you, Mr. Chair. Regarding Alder Parente's point on the unprecedented times and the FTE that was in question earlier, I just want to thank you for your acknowledgement, your empathy, and your action on the diversity, equity, and inclusion front.
Any more questions for the Board of Ed? Alderman Moran.
Thank you. You know, coming in here tonight, I thought I did my homework because there's just so much to understand. And I knew you would answer our questions because I've watched you on all your meetings, seen your presentations, and I know that you look to dot your I's and cross your T's. You're in education. That's what we do as educators, right? We try to make sure we cover everything. And I know that if we were just going to make a decision based on our heart, we would know where we would stand, but we're talking about numbers. And so I appreciate that you answered everything that we had, and, you know, and tried to understand why we spend what we spend. And I appreciate your honest answer when asked in terms of your reduction, what you could potentially trim away. And I even recall on one of the meetings you were talking about how you were trimming away even at the summer program because you were trying to balance out this year. So I know that you're mindful of that, and I know that you even made reference to the struggles you have with getting interns and how to recruit for that. And even you have an opening for a psychiatrist or a psychologist, and they're hard to find, the psychologists. So again, I thought I did my homework, and I thought, you know, I have a good handle on this, and I've learned a lot more. And I still think there's a lot more to understand because it is multifaceted and it is layered, it is complicated. So I appreciate you trying to help pull away and dig down to some of those layers. Thanks.
Any more questions for the Board of Education? Alderman Giannattasio.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Through you, good evening. I know it's late. I've been listening to all the thoughtful questions and the answers. And thank you, Dr. Kataya, for your spectacular presentation and your cutting-edge vision for Milford's education. And Mr. Riccitelli, thank you as well. You're a wealth of knowledge on both sides, like you said. And Susan, you should get an award. You're so dedicated to the board, and I appreciate your service. And Mr. Brown, you've brought services back into Milford to help save money for the taxpayers, and I also recognize that as well, and we appreciate that. I've been listening very closely to what's happened here, and it's really nobody's fault, and I do appreciate the parents for coming out as well, because this is an important issue. I do have some experience with this. I've sat on this board through Simon Lake closing and the potential 10 years ago of Harborside closing. And there was a meeting here, and I believe Suzanne was here, and there was a big debate, and we ended up saving the school through the Board of Ed. I believe it was John DeRosa at that time. He was a first district member, Board of Ed, and I got to know John very well. He's obviously in my district. So I'm a big advocate for education and the future of education, and I don't want to see any programs being cut. I think we need to be competitive. I think the world is more competitive than ever, and it's just going to continue on and on. But what I'm concerned about, the lens that I'm looking through right now, sitting up here, is I don't want to close a school, but I want to work through the problem. I want to come up with a solution. I happen to have sat on the long range plan committee with the Board of Ed, and I think Susan, you were on that as well. And there was input from parents, PTA members, educators, and elected officials. And we met and we took an inventory to see where we were at. And Dr. Kataya, you indicated that you like the levels of where we're at per building. And I respect that, and I understand that. But you've also indicated that these other two middle schools, if Harborside was to close, would be able to house the additional students. So with that being said, if we weren't here under these circumstances, which I believe was a knee-jerk reaction and caused a lot of anxiety in the community, if we take the initiative and we look at what we're dealing with now and we want to be better and we want a community to come together and decide what the best course of action is through forming a committee, why can't we hit the pause button, maybe consider reinstating the money, but with a contingency plan, and look at these schools, and you mentioned an elementary school, what the possibility is, what that looks like, potentially. This way, the parents know well in advance, like you said, we don't want to close a school under these circumstances with a short window of time. I don't think that's fair to anybody. But I think something needs to be done, because Alderman Marlowe brought up the fact that $28 million to put into Harborside to keep it open is a lot of money, and it's an old school, and I know it gets flooded and things like that, and I'm just saying maybe we should take that money and maybe, put it into maybe East Shore and West Shore and get them ready if we decide to do a middle school, with everyone knowing what's happening and when it's going to happen, or an elementary school, I just don't like what we're dealing with now, because it's something that is being done. You know, you shouldn't make decisions like this under pressure. And there's just too much pressure. There's too many kids that, you know that their school might close. The parents are very anxious, and I don't blame anybody. But, you know, if we're going to invest $28 million, I don't know if that's the right school to invest $28 million in, the right building. I think we have to look towards accomplishing the initiative that you've put forth with education, maybe in a smaller footprint, long term. But right now, I think, you know, if we can support keeping the school open and hopefully get a committee formed and talk about what's next, I think that, for me, would probably sound like something that I would be in favor of. But once again, I can't tell you how to spend your money. I can't tell you, you know, whether to do a long-range plan or not. I know that's been brought up by Alderman Vitale, and, you know, here we are. I just don't want this to be reoccurring, because I feel like with inflationary times, these budgets, and to your point, Dr. Kataya, you said it, you're coming back with another increase. So, and then you want, not that you want it, but then the taxpayers have to pay $28 million because we kept the school open. You know, maybe we should approach this differently. And I would just like to maybe get your thoughts on that, but that's you know.
I'd like to answer this first, and then I'll let Dr. Kutaya weigh in, because she's got a brilliant mind for this. I have two things I want to mention. So last year, we did extend an invitation to every alderman to come and tour our schools. It was about this time last year in the spring, and I think we heard from 2 or 3 aldermen, and that was it. So we extended the invitation. We wanted you to come see what we're doing with our buildings now. And, you know, any alderman that wants to visit schools, you know where she is. Give her a call, and she'll arrange for you to visit schools. And we absolutely, as a community, need to have conversations about where we want to see our school district going. COVID got in the way. We did have plans to do some community conversations and things like that. And we have talked about starting that up again now that we're beyond the pandemic limitations. So I think those are very important conversations to be having as a community. And now I'll let her have her say.
Thank you. I think there's great value and insight in what you're saying. I would love to have the opportunity to bring community members together with a third party that will facilitate a professional look at the use of educational space. Not me, who I may have a biased view, not a member of our community who went to school in 1970 and said, this is too much. So I think somewhere having a third-party professional coming in to look at use of educational space in 2023 is a good idea. Along with, I think it's a coupled approach to talk about what do we want for our schools in the future? What do we want for our kids? And not necessarily in a facility perspective, but programming. And then the two inform each other. So if we want more tech ed offerings, let's say, well, a tech ed space is very different than a regular classroom space, and we would need to invest some capital in that. So that academic and program plan could inform the facility plan as well. I've also thought about how to meet the needs of our youngest learners. So we have just a growing need in the ages of 3, 4, and 5 right now, as you may know personally, that we just have more students, not in a general ed side, but in a special ed side, demonstrating that they need more support. So we have quite a number of preschools across the district now, more so on the SPED side. So I want to give some thinking of where are they best served. And then additionally, these are just the ruminations of a superintendent at 11 o'clock at night. I also want to talk about where are our academy kids best served. While I appreciate that, I am so grateful we have the academy, but I think that there are other opportunities for alternative education in 2023 that may need more space or more engagement with other students. So I think we have opportunity in not just do we have enough space for all of our kids and do we spend $28 million at Harborside. I think there are other questions I have that I want to put on the table that could be benefited from a facility study as well as a long-range planning on the academic side. I don't know that we can get that done by, so like I said, we start baking our budget in October. And everybody goes away in the summer, so there's no getting parents around the same table in the summer. So we could likely start this and run the entire school year on some planning and some evaluating of space. So I would entertain, reinstate the full 4392, and we commit to a long process that opens up the dialogue for Board of Education, administration, community members, to answer the questions, what do we want for our kids in our schools? What are the experiences? What are the programs? And what are the facilities that support that? And what are the budgetary resources that we need to commit to in the future so that we're not playing the game of how close to 2 can we get? If we're going to speak honestly. That's the game we play. How close to 2 can I get so I don't get in trouble, right? That's me as superintendent talking. I have 10 bosses that would need to weigh in on that, though.
Well, I like what I'm hearing. I'm willing to commit to that. I can only speak for myself right now, but I just want to find an end to this, you know, where everybody's happy, and that includes the taxpayer. I just can't see putting $28 million into a building, you know, and then have to worry that if your budgetary asks are not met, that we're going to have to close the school all over again. I think we need to get beyond that. So thank you, Dr. Kataya, and thank you.
I just wanted to add one little point. In terms of timing, I appreciate your comments and your thoughtfulness. And I hate to say this, but you have to also consider the election cycle. You know, we have elections coming up in November. Something probably would not start that quickly because then you have a whole new set of elected officials that would really should be weighing in on the questions, correct? So it's unfortunate, but our election cycles stink, you know, every 2 years. So that's also something that has to be taken into consideration too, so.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Alderman Casey.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I agree with Dr. Kataya. This the worst possible situation, closing the school that like before the calendar year, and also like I can just direct this question, I guess, to Mr. Relaticelli. There's even if we have closed the school, there's carrying costs to keep Harborside open, right? So that's kind of wasteful. Can you explain to me what the carrying cost is, please?
I'm sorry, what costs?
Carrying to even if we close
Sure.
the Board of Education close Harborside, is still you still have a carrying cost, right?
We do. We still will have to heat the building, you know, keep the plumbing on, the electricity, things like that. We can't just mothball the building altogether, and that would be, you know, that would be a greater conversation for the community. But there are many things that we would have to continue to carry. In addition, there are costs, whatever reimbursement we got from the state for a particular building, there's a 20-year life cycle that the state carries. So whatever number of years are left on that particular renovation, then there may be a payback that the state requires the city to make. However, as long as we can say, like we have done with Simon Lake, that we're using it for educational purposes, even if the educational purposes at Simon Lake were storage of educational facility, educational equipment, things like that, then the state did not require us to pay the money back. But I just want that to be out on the table, that there is the possibility of a payback to the state for whatever reimbursement we got prorated for the number of years that have expired.
Any idea how much it is, or like, how ballpark?
No, every school is different, and I know we've been talking about Harborside, but I really don't want to go into the specifics of the amount of money that we've put into Harborside and how many years are left. I mean, that study will be done if we're forced to do it. But at this point, it would be an arbitrary number or a guess on my part.
Thank you.
Alderman Beatty.
Thank you, Chairman Vitro, and through you to our distinguished guests, and thank you. I think Alderman Giattanasio is very sincere and very many thoughtful points. I always support long-term strategic planning, especially when tied to budget. But it also sounded like a wrap-up or a summary that we had some discussion and there was some decision of whether or not to close Harborside, or that we were nearing that. And that has not occurred, not only across the board with all of us, but we have not, as our own Democratic board, met and discussed this and where we are. There are still budget hearings before us, and some of them are significant. The Public Works is the 27th, so we have not even heard. And there are not two options: to take the money, which is fixed, and decide whether or not to fund the Board of Ed. Do you want my inclination of how? I mean, and that would be obviating what I'm saying about waiting to the end of the process. But even if we could do that, we still have the issue that it is not only education that has been affected by budgeting that doesn't consider the contractual obligations by contract that are, of course, within that budget. So we, as a board, and I may be an outlier, and I'm trying to be helpful. I think this is not a crisis. I think it's solvable. I think we have the agency to solve it, but this is a very complex issue. But we had superintendent of schools saying, I do not have enough in this budget to cover the essential services that I have to offer to my children. The fire chief has said he does not have in the budget what it will take to cover the essential services. The police chief has said, even though there was a behind-the-scenes worker out to free him up from the wage freeze, he has said that, and has said over many years, that he does not have the resources in the budget to cover the critical services necessary. And I know firsthand that Public Works, too, is in that same situation. So I'm not interested in criticizing what was. I'm dealing with what is. And what is now, we have agency among this board to look. I don't want to raise taxes. I don't want to raise the mill rate. But if the mill rate was up 0.5%, would that free up enough revenue stream so that we could consider reinstating a potential reduction for the Board of Ed and the other critical services? What would that be? And I think that all of what I'm saying, not I think, I know, all of what I'm saying was evident in May 22 when the budget was too restricted to accommodate all of the legitimate requests to provide essential services. So somehow what once was very, very good and made us the most stellar town in the world and let us provide services with the flat mill rate and the flat tax rate is no longer. And I have listening to people whom we trust crying they can't do it anymore. That's almost a quote. I can't do it anymore. There's not enough to provide essential. So it's not just you. So I want to take the discussion away from the Board of Ed and what? Continue the flawed, we need maybe a long-term strategic plan for all those other departments. So I'm sorry if I'm an outlier. It's not a criticism, but the noise from what was is not of our interest. It's the noise from what is now. What do we have the agency and the capacity to do about it? Thank you.
Alderman Archiola.
I'll shift the mood just a hair. I don't know if we're wrapping up. I might be misreading the room. You guys might want to go for another 4 hours. I'm down if you are.
Wrapping up is good.
Okay.
Let's land the plane. Let's go
cool.
home.
No, I just wanted to, a thought dawned on me that this is the last time we're meeting with Jim Riccitelli, and I wanted to just thank him for all of his years of service. He's an incredible public servant, and I've known him since I was a kid, and he would come into my family's shop, and you know, it was a big deal, the mayor, you know, and he was always an incredibly kind and patient and selfless public servant, and I have been very grateful to know him, and I think we should all be very grateful to have benefited from his wisdom. So thank you very much for your service.
Sure.
Chairman Butcher?
Alderman Willis.
Yes, I just want to kind of echo what Alder Archiola said. I've worked with you many years ago. You were over there, and I was here someplace, and good times, right? I've never seen you more passionate than you have been tonight, and about budget and everything, so good job. I liked your presentation, so, or your answers to stuff, so.
Let's wrap up.
Alderman Parente.
I know we're wrapping up, Chairman, through you, but just, is there anything I'd like to ask that we haven't asked tonight that you think we should have, that you want to make a last comment about before we adjourn?
Well, I do want to thank you for all your questions. I mean, it's, we always hope that you'll ask a lot of questions, and it's because this is how you learn. I always say that just going through this exercise is a education in and of itself. So, and I appreciated very much Ms. Mulrennan admitting that she actually watches our meetings and that she does her homework. So it's very, that's great. I just want to reiterate that, you know, we really do take our budgeting as a board very seriously, and what we presented to you truly, I mean, as I said earlier, it could have been a much larger ask. We really understand the challenges that everyone is facing right now, but this is the reality of where we're at in terms of the needs of the district, and I just, you know, ask that you give it some very careful consideration.
This is exactly what I expect the interaction and engagement to be with an elected body and the superintendent of schools of a city. It's a dialogue, it's an inquiry, it's a push and pull on thinking. I always enjoy coming before this board, and I'm always ready for the grilling, so I appreciate it. But it doesn't have to be over this evening. I'm available, phone, email, you want to meet over coffee, like if you want to continue this conversation, I am open and willing to do that. It's a complex budget. We spend months on it, and you have it for a little bit of time. So as you go through this process, if you have any additional questions or wonderings or ideas, please don't hesitate to contact me.
Any more questions for the Board of Education? Seeing none, excuse me, I want to thank you all too for coming out as you did and answering all the questions out for the board. And we'll do the best we can to serve your needs. I want to entertain a motion to recess until Thursday, April 27th.
So moved.
At 7 p.m. We have a motion and a second. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? We're in recess.